And this meeting is being recorded. This is the root cause analysis on the PG&E 2017 and 2018 wildfires. This is a follow-up to the workshop that was required by decision 20-05019. And so we're going to go through a couple of different, some introductions and some housekeeping to begin with. And then we'll jump straight into the meeting pretty quickly. We have a pretty busy schedule. So just virtual housekeeping. This meeting will be recorded. The workshop slides will be sent to the service list and posted on the CPUC meetings website. Questions, if you have questions, please type questions into the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Please raise your hand if you have questions. And we'll try to respond as we can, timing given our time constraints. And please be respectful, and please maintain, if you are not speaking, please keep your system on mute. You can see the buttons and the control at the bottom of your screen. There's an unmute button, there's a raise and lower hand, there's a chat, and there's a Q&A buttons. So please, if you're not speaking, please try to stay on mute. Thank you very much. So let me go over the meeting schedule very quickly. We have the welcome and introduction. We're going to have opening remarks from the commissioners that are on the call. I'll give a brief background on the RCA project, the root cause analysis project. And then we'll get into the meat of the discussion, which will be Envista's presentation on their root cause analysis findings. There'll be about 45 minutes for their presentations, and then we're allocating 15 minutes for commissioners' Q&A. We'll have a brief break, a bathroom break, only 10 minutes. So this is an action-packed meeting. And then PG&E will have its response and its thoughts on corrective actions. Again, about 30 minutes, and we're allocating 15 minutes for commissioners' Q&A. And then CPUC staff will present a proposal on its thoughts on corrective actions. Again, 30 minutes with commissioner Q&A. And at the end of the meeting, round 4, we'll have some time for public comments and then some closing remarks. So let me move on directly to commissioner comments. And so I see that President Reynolds is on the line. President Reynolds, do you have any comments, opening comments for us?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to welcome everyone to this workshop. Thank the staff for putting it together. We really appreciate all of the work on this issue. And then I just wanted to emphasize how critically important it is. I'm going to be listening very carefully today. I look forward to hearing the content. As you noted, this is an action-packed, a very content-heavy workshop, and I appreciate that. And I wanted to thank everyone for putting this together.
Great, thank you. And then I'll rotate around to Commissioner Rechtschaffen, who was the assigned commissioner on this proceeding when it was open. So Commissioner Rechtschaffen.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks everyone for organizing this workshop. I think this is an important milestone or event as part of our ongoing efforts to promote safety, improve safety practices, and avoid the kinds of incidents that we had in 2017 and 2018. As you noted, I was the lead commissioner in the enforcement action dealing with those fires, which were horrific and resulted in over 100 fatalities and multiple injuries and loss of life and damages. And it is important for us not just to impose fines, but for us to get to the deeper causes of why these fires happened. That is how we will ensure that we can safeguard communities going forward. It's taken a while, but we have a comprehensive analysis. We have a deeper understanding of PG&E systems and risks. This is not the only way we're trying to get at that. We're doing that through multiple efforts, including our wildfire mitigation plan review, the Office of Energy Infrastructure and Safety efforts, our enhanced oversight and enforcement program. But this gives us a deeper understanding of what was responsible for these catastrophic events. And we have, importantly, an opportunity to put a substantial amount of money that is funded by shareholders. This is not ratepayer money, shareholder money to work to improve safety. So I look forward to the presentations today. And I think it's imperative that whatever we decide is the best use of these funds, that we move quickly and efficiently to spend them and implement the recommendations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Rexhoff. And then I'll go to Commissioner Shiroma.
Thank you, Richard. As President Reynolds outlined, today's topic material is of crucial importance. And in looking back at the 2017 and 2018 wildfires, we have an opportunity to ensure we correct the behaviors, processes, and infrastructure that contributed to those catastrophes. And I look forward to today's presentations to better understand the causes and consequences of those fires and recommendations for steps moving forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I see Commissioner Houck is also online. Commissioner Houck, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank Commissioner Rexhoffen for his leadership in the proceeding that led to today's workshop. I also want to thank our Safety Policy Division staff for their work preparing today, and the consultants and Envista Forensics in preparing the root cause analysis. Again, as others have mentioned, we've got some real opportunities here in examining the root cause analysis and trying to identify and look at how we can fix problems and prevent catastrophic wildfires and other risks going forward. Today's workshop is part of the robust process that was ordered in the decision to take a look at the analysis. And following the workshop, I know that there will be some recommendations from staff, and as the lead commissioner for the Commission Safety Culture proceeding, I'm particularly interested in hearing more about the recommendations for corrective actions, how these recommendations may overlap and complement the work we are doing in other proceedings, especially the safety culture rulemaking and our next steps in the continued review for the root cause analysis assessment. So I want to thank you and all of our presenters, the parties, and the public for participating today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone this afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much. And then, of course, Commissioner Reynolds, our second commissioner with the name Reynolds. So Commissioner John Reynolds.
Thank you, Richard. Keeping things confusing. I would like to offer my thanks to the staff for supporting this effort and helping us to get in position to learn from the root causes and improve upon our safety oversight moving forward. In the interest of getting to the meat of the workshop that we have today, I will end my remarks here and offer a thank you to everyone who's participated today.
Great. Thank you very much. So let me move on to just a brief background on the proceeding, how we got here, where this came from, and how we got here. So in June of 2019, an order instituting investigation, I-190605, was opened to investigate PG&E's role in igniting fires. In 2017, during the course of the proceeding, that list was also include the Camp Fire in 2018. And then in May of 2020, there was a decision. And that decision, among other things, ordered that a root cause analysis be performed by an independent consultant. And along within that decision, it also allocated some funds to follow up on the potential corrective actions that might come out of this root cause analysis. So there was $50 million for corrective actions. There was also $17 million allocated to the RCA project to do the root cause analysis. The commission wasn't sure about whether or not 17 million would be the right number for a root cause analysis. So they also decided that any funds that were left over from the analysis would be rolled into the $50 million to do corrective actions. So to date, there's approximately the 50 million plus 17 minus about 4 million. So approximately 63 million is available to perform corrective actions. In July of 2021, Envista Forensics was selected to be the independent root cause analysis contractor, and they began work at that time. About a year later, Envista completed their final report, and they issued that, which is now available on our website. A month after that, PG&E issued its response to that report. And today we're going to move forward with we have the first workshop, which was required by the decision to consider corrective actions. This is the first workshop. There may be other workshops. Again, that's something to be determined going forward, as we gather more information from from Envista, PG&E, and the staff proposals and other comments. So we are going to be looking forward to participants' comments and input on the next steps. So I did also want to remind everyone of the fires that are in the scope of this project.
Richard, I think we lost you. Or
No, I'm still here. I was just giving people an opportunity to read the list and to look at the totals on the bottom. So these were the fires that were involved, and these were some of the issues that were quantified during the analysis. So I'd like to move on to the presentation. I think how are we doing? We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. So I'm going to turn it over to Envista to make their presentation about their root cause analysis. I believe they have about 45 minutes. I think there's going to be a video at one point. We have our fingers crossed that the video actually plays without any glitches. But so I'll turn it over to Matt to introduce your team and make your presentation.
Thank you, Richard. My name is Matt Steiner. I'm an engineer at Envista Forensics. As Richard noted, we were selected in the process of a long process. PG&E identified about 20 firms, and then the CPUC, based on selected Envista out of 3. Envista is a forensic engineering and consulting firm. We specialize in forensic engineering, fire assessments, building consulting, basically anything related to damaging or catastrophe events. And just to emphasize, this presentation is just a brief summary of a reasonably exhaustive evaluation based on what we had available. And the complete details of the analysis are part of our report. And Richard has a link to that report. He mentioned that. So going forward, I want to introduce Charlie Fisher. He is a subcontractor of Envista. Envista partnered with Widow Bryan's as a subcontractor, and he was a project manager for this effort. So, Charlie, you want to take over?
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Want to try to go through a quick summary of the background behind the report before getting into the details. As Richard just noted, we're covering the 18 fires listed here, 17 from October of 2017 and the November 8, 2018 Camp Fire. The scope of the project was pretty significant. There were 5 major components of that, 3 of which we're going to focus on today. Number 1, just to conduct root cause analyses for the 18 individual wildfires. As will be noted, there were actually 20 different ignitions. 2 of the fires had 2 sources. Second, identify gaps that can be closed by corrective actions to reduce the risk of future catastrophic wildfires. And third, to identify deficiencies and make recommendations for changes to the Commission's general orders for utility operations. We also cover in our report in several pages an evaluation of the Public Safety Power Shutoff Program and the integration of PG&E's integration of their wildfire threat maps into risk planning, as well as a general survey of other contributing factors to wildfires presented without recommendations. Next slide. Did it change, Matt?
Yep. There you go, Charlie.
Okay, thank you. The team that we put together for this project consists of experts in electric utility operations. I think we summed up the combined years of experience of our subject matter experts, and it's over 100 years of electric utility experience. Also, vegetation management, fire forensics, mitigation, and emergency management. And for those that have not seen the report, brief bios of all the participants involved in the project is presented in the last pages of the appendix. Just a couple of bits of background. The first of all, the limitations of this project. No physical evidence was available to our team for review for this effort, which is unique when conducting a forensic analysis. Many of the relevant PG&E employees that were involved at the time of the fires, obviously, were no longer with the company. We're now past 5 years from the fires of 2017. We requested and received unredacted reports and analysis of the ignitions from both CAL FIRE and the Commission staff. We also requested PG&E's analysis of the circuitry involved in the fires, but we're not able to obtain that. What PG&E did provide us was thousands and thousands of pages of data, and therefore we developed an applied methodology to determine the root causes from available data from both the confidential PG&E data as well as public sources, and developed a future decision analysis methodology to apply that to each of the 20 ignitions to determine the true root cause of the fire. Next slide. We conducted interviews with over 100 interviews were conducted in total with PG&E employees and contractors, also CAL FIRE Commission and its consultants, as well as other related firms. We did seek input from stakeholders from the cities of San Jose, Santa Rosa, and Sonoma County for input on the impacts of PSPS. And I want to just do a really quick summary of what you're going to hear in great detail in the coming minutes from my colleagues. The summary of the root cause analysis. The CAL FIRE and the Commission staff found that PG&E was responsible for the 18 wildfires studied primarily by not identifying and removing threatening trees. There are exceptions to that, but in general, our team concurs that the trees were an apparent cause of the wildfires. However, the root cause in a significant majority of the 20 ignitions was the likely failure of the circuit protection systems to de-energize fallen lines when severed, as is designed and intended. Key PG&E distribution system functional groups failed to identify the increasing risk associated with the down-energized conductors in the time period prior to the fires. And the primary true root causes of the 20 ignitions were asset management in 75% of the time, circuit design, circuit protection design, and vegetation management. And finally, although PG&E has taken significant actions to mitigate against this threat, including PSPS and EPSS, issues with high impedance faults on the three-wire electric system remain. It's now my honor to introduce my colleagues to go through this in detail. First, Matt OLeary, and then Mark Drexel, who will explain our analysis. Matt.
Yep. Thanks, Charlie. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Matt OLeary with Wood O'Brien's. I'm going to turn off my video so my my audio will improve a little bit. Hopefully, everybody can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Is that better now? Yeah.
Yes.
In as much as I used to reside in California, I now reside in North Carolina. And for those of you following the national news, you'll note that we had some sabotage near the Raleigh area, which is where I live. So if for some reason I drop out, that means I've had a power outage here. Duke Energy is doing all they can to actually restore power. So we've had some outages, but we wish them well in their efforts to get things back to normal. So if I drop out, I apologize, but it's Duke trying their best. But as Charlie mentioned, I'll be reviewing the wildfire electrical circuit root cause analysis method. I'll provide some background, walk through an actual example, and I want to try to help you understand the method and how we got there, the findings, and the conclusion, which Charlie just mentioned a little bit of. So I'll be looking at the functional groups responsible at PG&E, those doing the blocking and tackling, the performance of the protective scheme on those distribution electric circuits, and then I'll summarize the findings as quick as I can. I'm gonna mention critical items like high impedance faults. I'm going to talk about energized down conductors, and those are central to the findings in this particular area. So I'll do my best to explain them clearly. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move swiftly, so I welcome questions that folks may have at the end, and I look forward to that as well. Go ahead, Matt. Next slide, please. Was there a question? Can I proceed? Nope, I'll move ahead. Okay. So we began the analysis by looking at the PG&E electrical functional groups responsible for the system's health and welfare, the blocking and tackling, I'd say. And those groups would be the reliability groups, the planning groups, and the engineering functions. And remember, we're talking about 2017 and 18. So to establish the baseline, we looked at the performance of the system from 2007 to 2016, which is shown in the chart on the left. And this data came right from PG&E in their annual filings and their annual electric reliability reports that you could find. But in a nutshell, if I can direct your attention to the right side of the screen, you can see the trends are going down or improving. So if we put ourselves in 2016 in this particular area of PG&E, we would conclude we're doing things pretty well. We're spending limited budgets, we're applying tools, we're applying the right equipment, and we're doing the right kinds of things to impact the system in a positive way. So the folks were doing the right kinds of things. There's no doubt about that from the graph here. Next slide, Matt. Well, what we believe and what we found through the analysis and through the project is the process itself of the reliability created a blind spot for the folks in these particular functions. The blind spot was that they failed to identify the increasing risk associated with down energized conductors on the system. So this is the same data, 2009 through 2018 now, and you can see in the red circle, the impact that the wildfires had on the system with major events included. And under the blue arrow, you'll see the SAIDI system average interruptions really didn't move much. So again, what we feel, or what we concluded was this created a blind spot for those functional groups. Now, we don't say that lightly because these are well-intended people. They're doing the best that they possibly can. They've got the best tools. But they fell into what we think is a state of acceptance about down energized conductors. They may have been distracted by PG&E leadership with things such as smart grid activities. The DER integration, distributed energy resources, were coming on the system pretty heavily. There was lots of penetration that could have distracted folks. We also picked up on some organizational tensions between the engineering groups and the field operations folks, where back in the 90s, there was technology that was specifically piloted to detect down energized conductors. It was installed in pilots, yet the operations folks out in the field turned it off because of the reliability impacts of it. So defeating a possible solution back then in the 90s. Okay, thanks, Matt. So for some context, let's look at a video of an actual event. This happens to be Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey. And what you're going to see in the videotape is a distribution system and the protection scheme in action. So once it rolls, you'll see the wind is blowing. You'll notice a big tree in the upper portion of the screen. It's going to come into the lines. You'll see a flash. That's the system responding to the fault. You'll see the damage occur, and then you'll see another flash at about 10 seconds after the first one. And what you're witnessing is the protection scheme detecting the fault, clearing the fault. That's what we're going to get into later. So Matt, let's see if we can roll the tape without the audio, please. Choppy, but there you go. Keep your eye on the tree. There's the flash, then the damage. Now the system's cleared. The equipment has detected the fault, and if you count 9, 7, 8, 9, 10, if it wasn't so choppy, you'd see another flash. There it is. And then the system detects it and clears it, and then now that circuit is now de-energized. So you kind of get a sense of how the system would react in action there. Okay, man, let's go to the next slide. That was a little bit choppy, but I think you got the basic idea. Now to talk specifically about a typical distribution protection scheme. It's designed based on the electrical configuration, and its sole purpose is to detect and de-energize fault conditions. Okay, so let me describe this. What you're seeing in the incident overview in the box, the blue triangle is a circuit breaker in the station. It would have a setting somewhere around, let's say 1,000 amps. The light blue line is overhead lines heading to what's called a recloser on a pole, and it would be set at about 750 amps. Further out, you would find more wire and a fuse at the X, and then further at the area of interest, let's just say it's the fault, designated by the lightning bolt there. So the concept here is the fuse would detect the fault first. It would blow and clear the line, and we'd be able to keep more people in service. If the fault was in between the recloser and the fuse, the recloser would detect and clear. It's the basics of any distribution system that you would see in the United States today. On the far right is actually from PG&E. It's an example of the device coordination chart. It shows you time over current and how the devices would be sequenced and timed together. So again, the fuse should go first, the recloser would back it up, and then finally the station breaker. And this is just a basic simplified scheme that would be used and was in place at PG&E 2017, 2018. Okay, Matt. Now to recreate and do the RCA method for each and every one of the circuits involved, we needed to create a timeline of the events, the beginning, middle, and end. And what we used on the left side was a set of data that came from these particular places. The first being CAL FIRE. They produced investigative reports for each and every one of the fires. It primarily looked at the fire, the direction it went in. CPUC SED also did a detailed investigative report, which did focus more on some of the electrical circuitry. And then finally, PG&E had several pieces of data that helped us quite a bit. There was incident descriptions and factual summaries of each of the events. There was a supplemental report to that. Then within the system itself, they had integrated logging and information systems, ILS. They had equipment data logs. These would be Excel spreadsheets downloaded right from those devices in the field, and then finally outage reports. All of these were used to create the timeline on the right side of the screen, which would allow us to establish when the event initiated, when the fire was started based on CAL FIRE or CPUC, and when the event ended. So we created these timelines for each and every one of the events. As the research project unfolded and as our project moved forward, we were asking PG&E for more and more information about this. They got to the point where they felt as though they were not presently in possession of all the information necessary to demonstrate whether everything operated as intended. And we really didn't get a chance to interview anybody who had direct experience. As Charlie mentioned up front, many folks had left the company, but you know, for our purposes, the decision was to just go on and we could create an unbiased, independent view of each of the circuits. And that's just what we did using the data set on the left. So think of it as a clean sheet of paper is what we used. Go ahead, Matt. The next slide. So here's an example. This is the Adobe Wildfire. It involved the Dunbar 1101. That's the circuit designation. And let me walk through it. Beginning with that same incident overview, in the box you see the diamond, the blue diamond, the Dunbar breaker, 1101. You see a line recloser, 234. You see a fuse, 1261 at the X, and then you have the area interest as a blue star. Okay, if you direct your attention to the lower portion of the slide, starting with the number 1, we know that from the record at 8:22, we had a meter out on the circuit on the circuit in the area of interest that went out. That was the beginning of the event. And number two blue dot, at 11:14 p.m., we know the line recloser on that circuit detected fault, it tripped, and it reclosed, meaning it opened because it saw fault conditions, closed back in, re-energizing the circuit. At 11:30, number 3, PG&E troubleshooter arrived in the area that had been dispatched there. They reported seeing a fire. 11:34 p.m., the Adobe fire starts per the CPUC reporting. Number 4, PG&E at 11:35, they remotely opened that line recloser 234, and that was the end of the event. The CAL FIRE report had the fire starting at 1 a.m. And most importantly, out here to the right, the number 5, the next morning, 1 a.m. in the morning, PG&E did an inspection at that fuse pole, 1261, and found 2 of 3 fuses blown. That's a critically important finding. And then let me tell you why. Up in the upper right, we can come to some incident observations. We know that a tree contacted the circuit from about 60 feet. We know we had an energized conductor on the ground, possibly from 8:22 to 11:35, 193 minutes. We know we had a possible failure of the fuse at 12:61 based on that inspection I just mentioned. We know the conditions of the fault were probably high impedance fault based on photographic evidence that we found. And we know based on the electrical configuration of the circuit, there was probably backfeed as well. So this is what was done for each of the wildfire circuits. Just go back for a second, Matt. And this is the most important. Go back one, please. Yeah. So this is exactly what you'll find in the report for every one of them. And for the most part, this example is representative of what we found, not for all, but for the majority of them. Something like this. Some had the energized conductors down for more, most of them for less, many of them for more than 30 minutes, but in a kind of a quick snapshot, this is what is a good representation of what we found, the majority of them. Okay. Go ahead, Matt. So to show you a little bit of the data set itself, and we can go through these kind of quickly, but on the left side of the screen, this is from PG&E's, this integrated logging information system, their internal systems, or ILIS. We would be able to find things like the fuse inspection. And we can see here it's timestamped. A troubleshooter went out, looked at that pole, and discovered that 2 of 3 fuses were blown. It was recorded here. This is how we put together the timeline. On the right side, from the line recloser, the device in the field, these recordings came right from the relay in that device. So we see a timestamp. We have a better understanding of what happened. And again, we can piece together what actually happened in terms of that timeline. Okay, go ahead, Matt. Some further examples. This is from the vegetation management portions that came in. as Charlie mentioned, the CPUC SED and CAL FIRE did a wonderful job with the vegetation management. For the most part, we concurred with a lot of the findings, with few exceptions, and I'll let the vegetation management folks correct me on that. And we can go forward, Matt. There's some photographic evidence here we can show. This happens to be, again, the Adobe with the Dunbar. This is that eucalyptus tree that caused the entire event. You can see in the photographs the conductors on the ground on the left and right, and that you can see a communications cable that could be telephone or cable TV, and then the actual electrical circuits out there laying on the street. So this is where we had the 193 minutes of an energized conductor on the street. Next slide. Further photographic evidence from the Cal SED report and Cal Fire, or CPUC SED Cal Fire rather. These are fulgurite pictures from underneath that tree in the roadway that were caused by the conductor on the ground for an extended period of time in the pavement or macadam. So these reports helped, again, confirm and validate what we created in our timelines. Go ahead, Matt. And then just some definitional information for everybody. That we're going to characterize commonalities for our findings. The circuit configuration, I mentioned 3-wire, and there's 4-wire. The 3-wire system is the one that was primarily in play here for most of these events. System protection failure is when we have the scheme failing to detect and clear a fault. Electrical backfeeds created when we have an abnormal reverse electrical energization that's not intended. High impedance fault conditions are very important. It's when a conductor that's energized hits the ground, it does not cause enough of a fall for the system to detect it. So it can, again, be there for a long period of time until it's found by a troubleshooter or by a report. And then last one is energized down conductors, which is sort of self-explanatory. Thank you. So for Adobe, go ahead, Matt. For Adobe, here's the findings categorized. Again, circuit configuration happened to be 3-wire. We know the protection system failure. We know there was backfeed. We know we had an energized conductor down for 193, and we had a possible high impedance fault. So this is another way for us to summarize things. And go ahead, and then there's tables and more detail in the report itself, but this is all of them. Sorry for the eye chart here, but on the left, you'll find the wildfire, then the circuit involved, the configuration, whether it was 3-wire or 4-wire, whether the protection scheme failed or not, system rather, and then the amount of time that the energized conductors were on the ground. You can see there's Adobe 193 was the first one, and you'll see a range of times. 87, some are 0, some are 144, some are more, some are less. Go ahead, next slide, Matt. Next one's kind of more of a summary, a different slice of the same data. This is in the report as well, table 4 and 5. 4 happens to be those with high impedance fault condition and backfeed, and then finally table 5 is all of the 3-wire circuitry that had energized down conductors for over 30 minutes. Okay. So in summary, as I mentioned early, we looked at the functional groups to figure out where they were, and it's our position that they failed to identify the increasing risks associated with down energized conductors. The majority of these happen to be the 3-wire system, which are prone to high impedance fault condition, which results in long duration energized down conductors and can have electrical backfeed conditions. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Drexel, but before I do that, let me just ask my teammates, is there anything that I may have missed or that I could cover again, or can we move forward? Charles, what do you think, Charlie?
No, I think we're good to move forward. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, sir. Thank you all.
Okay, good afternoon, folks. I'm Mark Drexel. I work with Whit O'Brien's, and my primary focus for this investigation was failure decision analysis. The root cause analysis utilizes a process for identifying the basic or contributing causal factors that really are the underlying variations in the performance associated with the adverse event. The results of the RCA, which Matt just went over, were used to develop a fault decision tree analysis for each fire. Next slide, please. So a failure decision analysis methodology was developed for this RCA, and applied to each of the ignition sources. The failure decision analysis is a graphical technique that identifies all of the potential failure causes. And it's applied uniformly across each of the ignition sources. The methodology differentiates from the apparent root cause, which for most of these fires there was a tree involved, and that's the apparent root cause, the start of the event. But the FDA really differentiates the apparent root cause for the actual root cause, and the next slide, please. Okay, no, I'm sorry. Stay on that one. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. So there, for each fire, the criteria was developed in two key areas. As you can see, the condition, the effect and result criteria included whether or not there was an energized conductor present, whether or not there was a high impedance fault, backfeed condition, and multiple phase fault. So these all stem from the RCA that Matt mentioned earlier. The second area was the apparent root cause, and that was listing those initiating events, such as tree-caused event, device misoperation, and equipment failure, manual operating error, system design, or protection scheme issue. So those are the next level of review that we did. Following the process from the initial system symptom, which was the fault condition, to the condition, effect, and results criteria, then we moved on to the apparent root cause. From there, a root cause category can be derived. And the root cause categories are defined as programmatic or process-related activities, such as inspections, maintenance, management, implementation, design, and human performance. As you can see on the diagram, each of the root cause categories are listed there. And I'll just give you a quick definition of each one of them because the details are in our report. The asset inspection essentially is inadequate procedure for and/or inspection of distribution facilities. The asset maintenance, which is systems not adequately maintained for their intended use, and you'll find the frequency of asset maintenance is the #1 criteria that we found as an issue. The asset management, lacking a defined systematic process for addressing assets. Next would be the circuit design, and Matt went through that. Design of the 3-wire overhead system creates a condition in which the circuit protection frequency does not detect and interrupt a phase to ground fault. The circuit protection design differentiates from the circuit design, and that is that there's inadequate protection design to prevent the circuit damage due to a fault. And then to a lesser extent, the operating error, we found that there was one operating error, and that essentially is an event or condition resulting from individual human performance issues. Then we move on to the vegetation management. There are two areas we looked at, and that was implementation of the vegetation management program, an inadequate vegetation management trimming and removal program, and then the vegetation management inspection activities performed were inadequate. So that kind of sets the stage for the next part of this, and that is the failure decision analysis. This is a process diagram, and again, I apologize for the eye chart. The results from the results from the RCA were used to develop the fault decision analysis for each of the wildfires and identify the root cause categories. These are the most basic causes that can reasonably be identified, that management has the control to fix, and when fixed, will prevent or significantly reduce the likelihood of the problem recurring. We applied 22 separate criteria to each fire to determine the root cause category. Each of the flow paths terminate in one or more of the root cause categories, which we'll review on the next slide, and we'll use Adobe as the example. Next slide. So here's the output from the RCA, and identified the 5 criterion groups, and then identified specifically whether or not the condition, the criteria actually existed within that fire. So each of the ignition sources, fires were, this analysis and this data was collected from the RCAs to move to the next step of the failure decision analysis. Based on the findings from the review, the vegetation management circuitry and protection system, a database of potential root causes criteria were compiled for each one. The provided documents that we got from PG&E, CAL FIRE, and CPUC SED were reviewed to identify the criteria required to conduct the FDA for each of the wildfires. The following represents the criterion for the wildfire and how we used it. So next slide. So this is the portion of the failure analysis flow chart that we showed earlier that applied to the Adobe Wildfire. And as you can see, there were there were three of the criteria that were determined to be root causes for the Adobe fire. And the asset maintenance, and then circuit design, and then we move on to vegetation management inspection. So this process was applied to each of the fires, and each of the fires have a similar flow chart, which terminates in the root cause category for each of the fires. It should be noted that that for this ignition source, the top 3 root causes by category and frequency that were determined for all 20 ignitions were identified for this fire. So asset maintenance, circuit protection design, and vegetation management. Circuit design were all top categories that were identified for the 20 fires. Okay, Matt, next slide. So this is a summary, and we've referred to the frequencies associated with the asset with each of these root cause categories. And the frequency is basically the number of ignitions where the root cause category was identified using the FDA divided by the total number of ignitions. So in 75% of the fires, asset maintenance was identified.
Those 2 days up there with there.
Am I hearing somebody speaking?
Then came back and said, well, that won't work.
I think there's somebody who's speaking who should be on mute.
Okay, great. So,
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
You said top 3, so circuit protection design wasn't one of the top. It looks like there's 4 here, so I'm a little confused.
So we have, if you look at, Matt, if you can go to slide 29, you'll see that there's asset maintenance, which is the blue. The circuit design, there were 2 paths that led to the circuit design issue, and then there was 1 path that led to the vegetation management. Circuit protection design was one of the top 4 root cause categories, but only 3 of those top 4 applied to Adobe Wildfire. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. That's what, so the circuit protection design didn't apply to the Adobe. The
Correct.
particular Adobe. Okay, thank you.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Anything the team wants to add before we move on to corrective action? Okay, great.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
All right. Corrective action. This section we're going to talk about corrective actions. In addition to conducting the 17 RCAs, the team reviewed thousands of pages of documents and conducted over 100 interviews. Based on such, the team has developed findings and associated recommendations for PG&E and for the commission staff. In some cases, the findings are a direct result of the individual RCA, while others are based on review of documentations of the programs in place prior to the wildfires. Next slide. You're on it already. So as the slide indicates, the finding and recommendations are organized by circuit design and maintenance, institutionalized learning, the emergency management and crisis management, as well as vegetation management. And then if we move on to the next slide. There we go.
This is Matt again. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to pass it on to Matt so he can discuss this particular corrective action.
So as I outlined for you in the review of the circuit, the RCA for the circuits, the fundamental design of the overall electric system permits undetected ground faulted overhead conductors to remain electrically energized, in contrast to industry best practice. A large portion of the system, the 3-wire, inherently creates a condition which the circuit protection system may not detect or interrupt a phase to ground fault, as Mark mentioned and as I pointed out for you as well. We know PG&E has taken efforts to mitigate this problem, but the problem remains, and we also know that there's a study that's been undertaken to look specifically at the 3-wire, 4-wire system. We think that's a good idea. We concur that that's the right direction to head in.
Okay. All right, next slide. Corrective maintenance backlog. So what we found was that there was a significant backlog in both duration and number at the time and currently, which contributed to a degraded system condition. There existed a gap between the technical review of the events and programs initiated to improve the operations. Also lacking were any metrics to validate the actions provided that the intended improvements were realized. Based on the incidents, it could be concluded that measures taken by PG&E were not effective in the areas of asset maintenance. And as mentioned before, it was 75% of the fires had some sort of asset maintenance issue associated with them. And next slide. So from an institutional learning standpoint, the PG&E did not have a de-energization protocol prior to 2017 fires, nor did they have an understanding of what the risk was. There's sufficient evidence utilizing the timeline coupled with results of the interviews that indicates not enough was done to show a proactive approach to de-energization. The decision 1204-024 in 2012 provided guidance to other utilities to shut power off, that they had the right to shut power off under the Public Utility Code in emergency situations when necessary to protect the public. It wasn't until 2017 that PG&E provided guidance to activate their operations center, emergency operations center, if PG&E de-energized electric distribution facilities to mitigate public safety and or first response. So there was a delay of up to 5 years before they actually took action. As the unprecedented drought continued into the second half of the decade, there was opportunities for PG&E to initiate action to mitigate against potential ignition by their electric lines. Even though the Liberty Report identified in 2013 and the CPUC called upon utilities to take action to mitigate against wildfires in 2014, the PG&E did not really recognize the wildfires were a risk until 2015 and didn't take action until 2017. So this was a missed opportunity to address the risk that was at hand. And Corrective Action Program, the company lacked and still does an effective corrective action program. Prior to 2017, PG&E had a standalone corrective action program. The lack of after action reviews being part of that, root cause analysis, and other lessons learned documentation indicates that PG&E lacks a robust best practice corrective action program. The current corrective action program is a formal process, but it's used at the discretion of the line of business. Every line of business can implement it as they feel fit. The findings from any after action reports are not tracked centrally. The PG&E event or incident reports using the online corrective action program are only prepared for a select number of unplanned outages. And based on the information we received from PG&E, it was about 10%. This is in contrast to the requirements that are delineated in the PG&E's Enterprise Corrective Action Program. The standard applies to identifying, reporting, and resolving asset safety, performance, and process-related issues involving or affecting any line of business that are not reported through other reporting processes. So again, their corrective action program is at best fragmented. The next area is emergency and crisis management recommendations. There were several that were made, and the cohesiveness of the emergency response program that PG&E had at the time and has now did not address things that would be directly related to identified threats, kind of an all hazards approach to emergency management. And as you can see here, there was an issue with the crisis management team, which didn't exist. The officer in charge responsibilities was in contrast to the incident commander and the incident command system. Given the risk given the risks of fire by ignition of their facilities, PG&E really should consider a full implementation of the incident command system, not just in name only, but in actual implementation on a daily basis, as other utilities have done. I'm going to pass it on to our vegetation management experts. Mike, are you still there?
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay.
Thank goodness. I apologize in advance. I'm off country, so my bandwidth may not be as good as it should be if I was back in the States. But some of our findings, we found out that senior management and directors and pre-inspectors really lack the education, skill, and experience to perform the work. An example is their senior manager and director, according to PG&E's job profiles, not that it's recommended, but it's recommended, not required, was that these folks had a natural resource background, such as a forester, had years experience, 5, 10 years in vegetation management field. The people that were in those positions lacked that education and experience. And the reason we think that's important is you need someone, a decision maker, to make those decisions for the program as a whole. And not having that background, I think, is a detriment to their program. I think PG&E has the largest vegetation management program in the world, and someone should be in that position, should have that type of experience. And then also we found out, some of the folks in the field that were doing the pre-inspection didn't meet the minimum qualifications for the contracts for them to be certified arborists in X amount of experience. And we recognize that finding folks in that position is tough. And I know PG&E is making some inroads in that by working with some local colleges to do some training for getting people out of high school and out of college. So that's movement in the right direction. Quality and insurance quality control is based on line miles, not on tree populations, which is a better way to determine inspections of trees. PG&E uses lump sum pre-inspection contracts, and in my experience, there's no other utility in the country that uses pre-inspection for lump sum. The only other is SCE, and they had a formal PG employee do a veg analysis for them, and he recommended pre-inspection on a lump sum basis. And the reason we feel that's a detriment is it doesn't give the time. Their compliance with radial clearance instead of looking at these that have some sort of defect. And finally, one of the other things was there's just too many vegetation management programs between SEMA, enhanced vegetation management, routine work. It gets confusing to the contractors. It also gets very confusing to the customers because you have 3 different people showing up at their property, marking trees for different things. And if they would just bring all those programs together, and they'd be more successful in hazard trees. And next slide. Sorry, there's a delay on my side. Again, personnel should have the professional education, experience, training, and certification and competency to administer management the vegetation management program. They should be using tree miles as a denominator. And the other thing that we feel pretty strongly about, especially in tier 3 and tier 4, that they should do 100% post-inspection and audit of all work. Even though statistically it's probably valid, 95% confidence level, but there's always that 5% you're not inspecting. And, based on some of our analysis for information, those lines where the trees failed, were they audited? And PG&E couldn't produce that data or didn't have it. So we don't know if someone walked down that line auditing the work of the pre-inspectors or the vegetation management contractors to do that work. So I think it's important that, and especially high fire risk areas, you do 100% audit. Again, convert the time and material contracts for pre-inspection. And we'd recommend only doing one patrol a year because and it should be a robust inspection. And PG&E currently does a patrol 1, a patrol 2, and sometimes they do 3 patrols in 1 year, and it's really not necessary if you give the inspectors time to look at all the trees within the right of way and trees that are potential hazards and identify those. Trees aren't going to die, especially from insects or drought, within a year that aren't going to be noticeable by a competent pre-inspector, as well as defects. Defects are going to be in trees for years, so they should be relatively visible to a competent pre-inspector. And again, just combine the VM programs, and it's consistent with utilities nationwide. They only have one program when they go in and they maintain the right of way. And that's all I have, Matt.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
I think Mark is going to continue.
Yes, yes. So the scope of the RCA included identifying areas where the CPUC general orders could be updated. The following are recommendations for potential changes to the general orders. Next slide. So the finding addresses guidance to expand the maintenance requirements to include preventive and predictive maintenance as a minimum standard. The GO 95 defines maintenance as the work done on any line or element of any line for the purpose of extending its life, except for the replacement or supporting poles and structures. This practice is known as run to failure corrective action repairs. Means if it's broke, fix it. Some of the leading programs in the industry incorporate 3 types of activities. There's the corrective action, and then there's a preventive maintenance, which is time-based maintenance based on usage. You know, how long has it been out there? Preventive maintenance is a good trigger for asset-based on-time or usage. The predictive maintenance, also known as condition-based maintenance, is a proactive maintenance strategy that monitors the condition and performance of an asset in real time to predict when the asset needs maintenance before it breaks. So we're recommending that and that would bring it in line with the existing generating facilities General Order 167. Okay, next slide. And I'm going to pass this back over to Mike.
Yes, the clearance distances in high fire risk areas, I think you need to back up one slide, for General Order 95, Rule 35, and 4293. I think if the commission would modify their Rule 35 in line with 4293, it would help with some confusion between contractors in the field. Is, you know, which clearance do we need to get, the general order or the public resource code? Because the voltages and clearance distances are different, and I think it just make it more streamlined if they were even based on 4293. Next slide. And hopefully it's up, Matt. The next one is adoption of ANSI 8300 Part 9. That's developed by the American National Standards Institute for Tree Care. It's a consensus standard, and it's designed and facilitated by industry experts in the field. And there's also a industry utility best management practice for tree risk assessment. And I think having those as part of any vegetation management program is important. And it also sets up the utility to determine and put together a program on identifying at-risk trees. Next slide. And the next one is just a field guide. And I know PG&E has a very robust tree inventory. They know what trees are failing, how they are failing. And this should be used as part of a support their training and reference for identifying hazard trees. And not only for the vegetation management department, but as far as troublemen or first responders or linemen in the field, is that they have a reference of they see a tree and it definitely is a hazard, that they can identify it and report it to the appropriate vegetation management VPM. And not only just this type of picture, but just to have pictures of the trees that are most commonly failing and how they're failing and what the defect is. And I think that's would be helpful. Again, the more eyes you have out in the field, including your troublemen and linemen, is very important as well to prevent trees from failing. Next slide.
I think that's it, Mike. Thank you.
Yep.
And Richard, that's the end of our presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions that that the commissioners may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Charlie and Matt and team and everybody. And so I will open it up for questions. We're running a little bit behind time, but not too bad. So I'll open up to questions from the commissioners. I see that Commissioner Houck seems to be online. Commissioner Houck, do you have any questions?
You know, I don't know if I have any specific questions right now. I know that there was some in the chat. I want to make sure we have time for that. And I'll defer to Commissioner Rechtschaffen first to see if he has any questions.
Okay, Commissioner Rechtschaffen?
Well, thank you. One question I have is just, can you situate us in terms of time? You know, a lot of what you describe is what led up to the fires and what were failures before the fires occurred. And then you have a series of recommendations, and some of those overlap with recommendations that have come through other processes. And I'm wondering if your recommendations, Envista's recommendations, are current, a current snapshot right now. Have some of them already been implemented because of the work you've already done to the root cause analysis, or otherwise, like some of the training and educational experiences for vegetation management managers and line workers? I know that's been a big source of discussion for our safety division for a while. It was a subject of the independent safety monitor, Judge Alsop's review when the PG&E was under federal court review. So can you just situate us in terms of the recommendations? Are they things that need to be done now, or some already in place?
That's a great question, sir. And I should have noted that at the beginning. We had a kind of a unique aspect of our scope in that, with a few exceptions, looking at PSPS, for example, our scope was limited to events that occurred up to the point of the fires. So basically up to the end of 2018. So it's 4 years ago. We're aware that many of those issues have been addressed. In PG&E's response, which is forthcoming, they note that they have implemented many of the things that we recommended. We have not vetted that, obviously, but we are aware that there has been some things that have been done. And hopefully we can get further address that issue through their response today.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, let me ask you one other specific question about the corrective action plans and you said only 10% were, I don't know if you root cause analysis or just corrective action plans were implemented. Is it still the case that it's left to the line of business to determine when to do corrective action plans, and that only a small portion of events trigger root cause analysis and corrective action plans? Do you know if that's something that's been remedied already, or what the current status of that is?
Yeah, let me ask Mark Drexel to respond to that, sir.
Commissioner, early on in our investigation, we were provided with current documents And then there was a restriction in terms of our scope of work. But in reviewing those current documents, the individual line of business application of the corrective action program still remained. So that's really all I can comment on now in terms of where they are currently. And maybe, PG&E can expound on that, but right now it's, we had limited information, current information to make any sort of assessment other than some specific reference to the line of business having the ability to make, implement the program at their discretion. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, we can get more on both of these questions I asked from PG&E. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's all for me, Richard.
Okay, yeah, Commissioner Sharoma, I see your hand is up. Thank you for raising your hand.
Thank you, Richard. Very succinct presentation, really pinpointing the issues. On the 3-wire versus 4-wire systems, I think there's an indication that there's a system-wide study of this. I mean, again, it's very disturbing that with the 3-wire system, there would be energized lines lying in the roads, and just thankful that somebody walking along there didn't encounter or emergency personnel didn't get electrocuted for all those time periods. But at any rate, is there any sense for when the system-wide study is going to get done, or is that a question for PG&E?
I guess I would refer that back to Richard and to the CPUC staff. That's something that was agreed upon, as I understand, prior to the conduction of this root cause analysis.
Yeah, and I'll just make a brief comment. We are going to discuss kind of the our thoughts on next steps on that project when we talk about CPUC staff recommendations. So that is, I believe, an open question about the nature and scope of that study.
Okay,
And we will talk a bit more about that when we get to our staff proposal. I see President Reynolds has her hand up. Thank you for raising your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Just had a couple questions. I guess starting towards the end of the presentation and going backwards. On the tree hazard identification guide, or incorporating the kind of diagram that you had into field guides, is that diagram something, I was wondering where the origination of that is. That something that you produced? Is it something that's used by other utilities? What is a little bit more background on that?
This is Mike Neal. I managed the program at Arizona Public Service Company, and when FAC 003.4 came into play, there was an imminent threat process, and so we had linemen and troublemen turning in trees that weren't necessarily an imminent threat. So we put together a field guide to show what species had defects, what trees were an imminent threat, and what to look at. So, and then we did an annual training with them, along with some other annual training that we had to do with them. For example, just chainsaws, they have to have annual training because they use it not daily, they use it, off and on. So, and it worked out well. And again, it saved us some time, but it also helped us identify trees that we needed to address sooner than later.
Okay, great. And this may be a question for PG&E, but I'm wondering how that compares with the app that PG&E uses out in the field. Any thoughts on that?
Commissioner Reynolds, do you want me to answer right now, or do you want to wait for the?
I'd probably wait, but I did, so I don't think we're hearing from PG&E now. I think I just wanted to know if the consultants had any questions or any response to it. If Mike, you had anything to add?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. And then another question at the beginning of the presentation, we heard a lot about the downed lines and the time of energization of the downed lines. And I was wondering if there had been any inquiries into covered conductor and whether that's something that would have made a difference in these cases, or is that a separate issue? And so even if the lines had been upgraded to covered conductor, would the outcome have been different?
Yeah.
Yeah, President Reynolds. This is Matt OLeary. Thanks for the question. Interestingly enough, the Adobe Wildfire, PG&E had installed covered conductor on that particular circuit. And the eucalyptus tree took that conductor down onto the street, stripped it just enough to cause that high impedance fault or undetected fault. So in a sense, they had tried to mitigate with the right type of cover conductor. I think it was installed in 1968, actually. I'm really not sure the year, but it's pretty old. But we didn't look much more beyond that, though, to try to answer your question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that is interesting. I saw the reference to insulation, and I wasn't sure whether that was the same type of technology used now for covered conductor or not, but that's helpful to know.
Yeah, it's one of the go-to things nowadays, using the new covered conductors for those type installations to prevent trees from coming in.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
And I would ask if Commissioner Reynolds has any questions. No? All right, I'm just going to quickly go to some of the comments in the chat. I see there's a question from Joyce Steingas. Her question is, your findings are that the gaps exist today in PG&E corrective programs. Are there gaps that exist in the corrective action programs today?
So, Richard, the one that I referred to where the line of business can implement based on their own needs is the only one that we had information that was current. Again, back to Charlie's comments, we were restricted to the time of the ignition backwards. So we did not have the opportunity to look at any of the current documents.
And then another question from Joyce Steingas. So is Whit O'Brien recommending a larger percentage of tree removal from rights of way? What about tree species that grow into the line prior to 12 months?
So yes and no. So I think PG&E standard right away width is sufficient. It's the hazard trees, and most of the outages and most of the fires are caused from trees outside the right of way. So grow-ins that would grow within the line within 12 months, I see that really not an issue, because the trees should be pruned based on species, regrowth rate, and if they're doing an annual inspection, they're going to prune the trees that need to be pruned, so they don't grow within the line within 18 inches or within that 12-month period. And as far as trees outside the right of way, that's what a tree risk assessment program is. And that's the ability to remove the trees that are a threat to the power line. So hopefully that answered Ms. Steingrass's question.
Okay, and one more question from Joyce Steingas. Should PG&E be excavating to examine the tree roots or probing the roots? Their inspections do not involve that presently.
I would say no. And the reason for that, they probably inspect hundreds of thousands of trees. And if the tree roots are defective, you're going to see some sort of decline in the tree, either in the limbs, branches. You're going to see mushrooms in and around the base of the tree.
You also need to look at the site conditions. So if it's on a deep slope with it's shallow soil and rocks, obviously you need to take a closer look at those type of trees. But I don't think probing is it's just not worth the additional expense to do that when there's other indicators that a competent inspector can look at and determine if that tree needs to be removed or not.
Okay, great. And the final question we have from the chat is from Will Abrams. What are best practices for how other utilities incorporate corrective action plans within larger strategy documents? How should PG&E incorporate their corrective action plans within their wildfire mitigation plans so that their strategy is grounded in continual process improvement?
So I'll take that, Richard. The focus of a corrective action program is to gather up as much information as possible, regardless of whether it had a adverse effect. And the purpose of that is for trending across lines of business, across types of events. And so having having a risk assessment, a risk-based program that relies on the corrective action program and its trends is the integration, the vertical integration of these programs. So really, it's gathering information, determining trends, and then identifying risks, and then mitigating the risks. So that is what most utilities do.
Great. Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I think we're just about at a little bit over our expected time. I'm going to call for our 10-minute break now. It's 2:28 by my clock. So I'm going to ask everybody to return by 2:30, 2:40. Let's call it 2:40. We'll get a 12-minute break. And then we'll begin with 2:40 with a presentation from PG&E. And so everybody has a chance to get a cup of coffee, take a bathroom break, and so on. So we'll see everyone again at 2:40.
Sounds good. Thank you.
If anybody is back from the break, can you all see my screen or anybody?
Mike, I can see a screen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, I can see it too, Mike. Thanks. Mike, who's going to be your presenter?
Andy Branches will be doing the presenting for PG&E, Rich.
Andy Branches? Okay.
Rich,
Correct.
I'm online. Can you see me?
No, I can't.
I turned on my video as well.
I got it. I'm not quite sure how they prioritize. Oh, there you go. Okay. Great.
And Richard, I might, as I do the presentation, depending on questions, I might call in James Chichillo, who's one of our engineering managers, who has a lot of expertise on the circuit design.
Great. Thank you. It looks like we're almost back. I'm going to give people a couple of minutes
Of
to
course.
roll back in.
Yeah, you indicate it and I'll start, okay?
Yeah.
Mike, we can skip the first couple of slides, at least the slides around safety, because I think we're in the middle of the presentation. So, yeah.
You want to start here, Andy?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone, it's 2:40. I'm just sort of giving you a warning, 30-second warning, 1-minute warning. It's 2:40 now, so if everybody's rolling back in to their chairs, seats, or wherever they are. Looks like we have Commissioner Houck back, Commissioner Reynolds, Commissioner Shiroma. I thought I saw, Commissioner Reynolds, number 2. And I'm not sure if Commissioner Rechtschaffen is back, but it's 2:41. So let's get started with the PG&E presentation. Andrew, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name.
It's okay. Andrew Branches.
Abraches. And Andrew Abraches from PG&E will start the presentation for PG&E on their response to Envista's report. So I'll throw it over to PG&E and Andrew.
Thank you. And thank you, Richard, for this, and all the commissioners for giving us the time in this session to kind of address the actions that we have taken from the Envista feedback. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Forgive me, my voice might be a little muted. I'm recovering from a cold. So, as stated in the presentation, as raised also by Commissioner Reichstaffen, was the Envista study was done based on the 2017 and 2018, and since that time, a lot of actions have taken place through the efforts of the Wildfire Mitigation Plan. So as I go through this, I'll try to highlight the efforts that have been undertaken and also kind of provide a perspective of efforts that are continuing to be taken as part of the Envista feedback and as part of the wildfire mitigation plans that we continue to file with energy safety and bring forward through the CPUC for review. As you know, we've taken that stand to kind of like catastrophic wildfire shall stop, and we've worked with agencies and stakeholders to improve programs. But these are massive programs and require a significant amount of attention and continued focus to address this wildfire risk, which is overwhelming. For a brief introduction, my name is Andy Branches. I'm the Senior Director for Wildfire Risk, and I report directly to our Chief Safety Officer and Chief Risk Officer, Mr. Sumit Singh. So I'll get right into it. Mike, do you mind going to the next slide? I'll start with the 4 areas of the learnings, and we can talk and go in more detail on these pieces. But at this, on the institutional learnings, the issue came up around the CAP process, right? And the recommendation is we do have the corrective action program that basically spans all of the lines of business, as we call them, gas, electric, power gen. A question came up about that was, is the corrective action program at the discretion of the line of business to implement a change? And so I'd like to provide a little color into that. The corrective action program resides under the chief risk officer and the chief safety officer, but each individual line of business also has corrective action program functions that roll up through a common system. And the intent of that is so that feedback about or corrective actions could be put into the system by anybody across the company at any level across the company. Where there is room for improvement, over there is the room for improvement around trending. But all of our wildfire incidents, all of our high safety incidents or high risk incidents are entered into the corrective action program today and get reviewed both at the line of business level, but also at the enterprise level for the trending portion of the analysis. So that is something that's in place. Obviously, with trends, you're constantly looking to spot if something different has happened. On the veg management at a high level, right? And I'll go into the subsequent slides. On the high level of the veg management program, there is a big effort to streamline it. As many of you are aware, we've looked at the veg management programs, given the challenge that we have of trees across our system, and look for how do we optimize the veg management spend, both to produce the end result for all stakeholders here, as well as result in a more effective program. And part of that action was, as many of you may know, we have decided to move away from the enhanced veg management program as we've looked back and seen, relative to other mitigations we put in place, what has happened with EVM. But to the point that was brought up, provide VM training to senior leaders, one of the reasons we've not implemented that piece at the highest levels is that program is a pretty large program, and we needed the managerial expertise to drive that program forward. So the program is under a senior vice president and a vice president who have that programmatic experience, having driven pretty large programs. An example of that, Mr. Peter Kenny drove the main replacement program in gas. Mr. Mike Seitz drove the crossbow program, high risk program. So those are the folks that are in charge of veg management now in the company. But at the local level, where the review of the work and the specific expertise needed is the arborist type training, most of the line leadership has that level of expertise at this point in time. Where we are in a gap is on the veg management inspectors, implementing basically a veg management inspection program where that person gets qualified as a certified arborist is the direction we're moving towards, but we're not there yet. The volume of veg management inspectors needed to be certified arborists is fairly significant, and it takes about 3 years to get there. I'll come back to these pieces, but I'll just touch on the high points that were being brought up. On the circuitry specifically, there was the discussion between the 4-wire and the 3-wire system. So first, I want to kind of put the circuitry into perspective and maybe ask James Chichilla to provide a perspective here. But across PG&E system and high fire threat districts, the bulk of the system is a 3-wire design system. It's not something that we've decided to decide at this point in time. It's a legacy of what we've had out there. And given that it's a 3-wire system, it is more prone to high impedance faults, as was indicated by Envista. However, what we have done is, if you look at the 2017 fires, the bulk of those fires occurred during a wind event. And as Envista calls out, we now have the PSPS protocols in place such that when the wind thresholds rise above a certain level, we would turn off power to those lines. And I think we've been honing and improving that PSPS protocol since 2018 and 2019. In 2018, we had it just for distribution. We had the unfortunate incident, the tragedy of the Camp Fire, that the bulk of that occurred from the transmission line. And so the PSPS protocols were expanded in 2019 to include transmission as well. And in 2019, we had a pretty massive PSPS, as everyone is aware, that we've now honed in with further sectionalizing and much more robust meteorological data. But beyond that, on blue sky days where you still can get trees that fall into lines, as you're aware, we've put in the enhanced power line safety settings. We put that on basically every circuit in the high fire threat districts. And in addition to that, we put that on that spans a buffer zone. And we've seen a tremendous number of reductions in ignition since then. Year to date this year, we're at 87 reportable fire ignitions, and most of the ignitions from those fires haven't gone beyond 10 acres. So they've stayed fairly small. However, to the point that Envista was bringing up, high impedance faults. How do you deal with a high impedance fault? A high impedance fault is a fault that's relatively low amperage, and that can reside on the line for a while. So what we've done in 2020, what we did in 2022 was we've utilized the smart meters that we have on the system today, because as was indicated even in the diagram of the Adobe fire that was just shown, was you have an outage. And if you see an outage on 2 or 3 of the smart meters associated with that circuit, our control centers now can have a screen that can see that, and they can proactively go ahead and turn off the power in that area, such that down line, if it was a high impedance fault, that down line is turned off as quickly as possible. So, ensuring that you don't have something over there for like 193 minutes, as was indicated. So the partial voltage is a way now for us to try and address that with the given design. Our goal is to say, what can we do with the technology we do currently have while we go ahead and rebuild the grid. The third piece that we're putting in with regards to the high impedance fault is a technology called the down conductor technology. It's a specific controller that should the wire get knocked down, it will turn off the power. So those are the technologies that we're putting in, given the fact that our existing system that exists in these areas is has been designed as a 3-wire system. So the luxury of converting it to a 4-wire system would take a significant amount of time. And we need to put protection in place as quickly as possible. So I jumped through those 3 big things right away because I didn't want to belabor the points through the slides, but I'll be happy to get into the remainder of the slides to say exactly what we're doing to each of the recommendations proposed by Envista. So let me just pause here. If people have questions, then I'll go through the rest of the presentation so that we can just get to the meat of what the commissioners might want answers on to find out what we're doing.
Hi, Andy. This is James Tisilo with PG&E. I'll just add 2 quick things. Thank you for doing a great job summarizing that. To add to the 3-wire conversation, one thing in particular with EPSS, which we've done starting as of the end of last year, was also intentionally set our gang-operated protective devices to see and reach beyond the fuses on our 3-wire circuits to help directly mitigate that backfeed issue that is associated with the 3-wire system. So in addition to the higher impedance fault detection strategies, down conductor detection, by allowing our traditional protected devices to see beyond those fuses and to provide a gang trip where that's all three phases open, de-energizing the line, it actually mitigates that backfeed situation with the 3-wire. So just wanted to add that. And then the other just quick point is that, you know, the 3-wire system, as mentioned in the report, is kind of a unique system configuration to California in general, not so much the rest of the country, but our peers down in Southern California both have a lot of circuitry of the same configuration and nature. So we routinely collaborate with them on new protective strategies and operational ways to help work with those systems, as well as capitalize on some of their inherent actually safety aspects as well that are associated with 3-wire, being able to set higher sensitivity in our protection because of the nature of them being 3-wire. So it's a trade-off there. So just wanted to add those two things. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Then I'll go into the rest of the presentation. We try to go to each of the recommendations and say how we're addressing it or where we're doing something different. So on the cap, enterprise-wide cap for all incidents, we've had an enterprise-wide cap since 2017. But as indicated, I want to be also clear, right? The line of business, the reason the line of business has some control of what exactly is the corrective action that will be implemented is because to specifically make a change, you want folks in electric operations to understand through the asset management function or through the operation function, how would that change be made and how would that change then ripple through the system? You need that ownership at that line of business to ensure that that is executed completely across the system. So that's why it doesn't help having an oversight group overall. The group overall would provide the trends, but you have to do the change at that within that specific a zone or scope of responsibility. The new cap also integrates the after action reports, and the after action report process standard specifically addresses findings from AARs that are how they incorporated that into the cap. And then a process to ensure plans, operational programs, and procedures are aligned with actions or addressed identified threats. We do the risk models to address all hazards, inclusive of wildfires. As Commissioner Reichstaffen, we've just completed, the update on that risk spend efficiency work that's now being dubbed the cost benefit type analysis. So we participated heavily in that, and that's rolling through how investments are made. And then the plan of reorganization that was put in place to put the chief risk officer, the chief safety officer positions, also the CAP program rolls in under Mr. Sumit Singh specifically to provide that executive level sponsorship specifically from a learnings perspective. If we could go to the next slide. On the wedge management recommendations, the note about the highest levels do need to have that professional wedge management education. It's a bit challenging given the scope of our program across the board and the levels of complexity in executing it, not just from what the work is, but also the programmatic aspect of managing the work. So at the senior-most level, they don't have the direct wedge management experience. They've got broad managerial experience, but at the local level, we do have the arboreal certification and the forestry education. And on my team directly reporting to me, I have a director that does the vegetation analysis and strategy work to direct what program should play in place. That person is a forester, has an arborist certification, and has been doing vegetation work in California for the last 20 years, specifically on our systems, in our service territory. On the personnel performing tree risk assessments, we completely agree. Our wedge programs need to kind of migrate more closely to these training requirements that embody and encompass the arborist certification in there. On number 3, which is combining VM programs into a more efficient, streamlined program, we are moving to the EVM to the one wedge program, where we'll have one database that captures all. but it really is intended to focus on the starting, which is the baseline, which is the routine vegetation management. This is where the annual inspection occurs on all 81,000 miles. And then on that 81,000 miles, depending on location, you would go more rigorous in terms of the type of inspections. An example is the high fire threat districts. Oh, one piece, what I heard from the conversation earlier was the suggestion not to patrol it more than once a year. I think we've on the SEMA program or the mid-cycle patrol, given the propensity that we see in California with the drought conditions, we do still feel like that mid-cycle patrol is useful. And so we do the mid-cycle patrol 6 months after the primary vegetation. And our new standard that we have in place basically says, hey, after something has been identified, you've got within that cycle of, when it was identified, within 6 months to mitigate that hazard tree or that vegetation, so that then when the next cycle comes out, that inspector is seeing it, is seeing the work already completed. So it provides a natural QA/QC function if it's spaced out appropriately. What we're trying to thin down the programs to make sure as we evaluate veg, they're evaluated as where do we see the outages, where do we see the ignitions happening on those circuits, and what type of work needs to happen specifically in those areas. With regards to the hazard tree identification, on the EVM program, we had a tool called the tree assessment tool. And we've taken that tree assessment tool now from our learnings and radically improved that. Really, it's called the TAT 2.0. But for our purposes, even a improved TAT 2.0 should not take away from the need for getting arborist certification and arborist experience. The variety of what you see out in our natural territory requires that there is that expertise of the arborist to recognize hazards. And so that's why we're pushing very heavily on the arborist aspect of VMI training. Excuse me. On the QA/QC programs, it said consider auditing 100% of the circuits. The programs, if you patrol the circuit once and then your mid-cycle comes in 6 months later, you get a natural QA/QC of the work to determine what needs to be done. And so that's kind of the strategy that we're trying to implement. And then the last one is PG&E should consider converting from lump sum contracts to time and materials. We did have lump sum contracts in place. We're now migrating away from the lump sum contracts, partly because of the same findings that we result from what Envista has called out. Envista has called out. Forgive me, my voice is really starting to crack here, so I apologize if that's interfering with my delivery. Can we go to the next slide? On the circuitry piece, there was reference to the study. I think the study, as you think about it, there's a study to understand the difference between 4-wire and 3-wire and what that, and we will undertake that study. We expect that to be completed by end of 2023. It also would address grounding methods. We perform, because of that wind event, and since that wind event, you also get dry lightning events. We performed a lightning study. So all of those have to come together to understand how should our system configuration migrate. As was called out, right? Even when you have overhead circuit lines, covered conductor overhead circuit lines in that example that was provided, you can still get high impedance faults when those come on the ground. Now, the new covered conductor standard, which is significantly better than what was before in place, which was called 3-wire, which was covered conductor. On those, we've done a joint conductor study with the other two utilities on covered conductor to understand the impact. But all of these studies need to come together into a tangible strategy as to how would we change the system. But it's become clear to us that in some parts of our service area where the risk is significant, it just makes more sense to underground. You can do the studies, but undergrounding the system takes it out of the harm's way of the trees that will continue to change and migrate. And part of the challenge that we're working with right now is getting as much of that work done as quickly as possible, while we have the protections of PSPS and EPSS to protect us during the days when you have extremely high wind or you have drought conditions that could pose a risk to the system. And then the second bullet was the comprehensive program to balance the maintenance, including predictive, preventive, and corrective measures. Since 2017, we changed out. As you may be aware, in 2019, what we did was we inspected the entire system, both transmission and distribution, a 100% inspection. But I'd like to take a minute to refresh the inspection system prior to 2017. We were following the compliance standard, and that was looking at defects that exist on the system from a reliability perspective, which is, hey, is this component likely to fail? We pivoted that in 2019 and completely redid the inspection program such that the inspection program in high fire threat districts is looking for components that, should they fail, are likely to cause an ignition. And because we look at it from the perspective of, will the system, if equipment fails, will it cause an ignition that'll result in a catastrophic wildfire? So moving away from a reliability focus to moving more an ignition prevention focus is what our system, our inspection program has migrated towards. We're continuing to improve it over the years, but we inspected it, the entire system 100% in 2019. We re-inspected basically a third of it in Tier 2 in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And then in Tier 3, we inspected it 100% in Tier 3. Now, those inspections, unfortunately, as you find the tags, there's a large volume of tags that we're working through the backlog to reduce. But we prioritize those tags, specifically of which of those tags have higher ignition potential. And based on that, we do the work and mitigate those tags as much as possible. As part of our wildfire mitigation plan, we will submit an updated plan on those tags as that's making its way through the analysis as we wrap up 2022. So just want to make sure we're very transparent about that. Our program now, from an inspection perspective, is really to catch stuff before it fails. So it's more closer to corrective. It's still not at the predictive stage. We're trying to use as much of technology as we can to try and predict where faults will happen. And we have technologies like that we're piloting. Early fault detection is an example of that, to try and see how we can deploy that out into our system appropriately. So those are the actions of what we're taking. If I could go to the next slide, I see some comments are coming in the chat, so happy to. On the emergency preparedness and crisis management, we do have ICS across the board for our emergency, but we've got to make sure that our ICS ties in well with the emergency operations, and how does ICS fit into the utility structure. We use ICS for all of our responses, and some of you may have seen, for wildfire, we have a hazard awareness warning center that is open 24/7 that monitors all hazards. It started as the Wildfire Awareness Warning Center, and now it's become the All Hazards Awareness Warning Center. So we're monitoring and looking for hazards, but only when thresholds are reached do we trigger the need to basically stand up an EOC, an Emergency Operations Center, or stand up what we call a local Operations Emergency Center at a local basis. And this is the intent of the Emergency Operations Center is you want to do your regular work across the utility, the base work of maintenance, inspection, repairs, replacement, and only when conditions are radically different do you activate an emergency operations. Because activating emergency operations basically has the effect of pausing work that's happening so that you can bring in those crews and focus on the emergency situation that occurred. And so that's why we don't feel keeping one constantly staffed makes sense. There are rosters, but we pull from regular people to do that, regular people from other jobs. The refining the role of executive management team to a crisis management team, we have that effectively stood up. So as incidents occurred, we basically, our EOT team, our executive officer team basically is then pulled in and informed and monitors the situation on a daily basis as part of that, under that emergency management structure. And the OIC responsibilities under the IC, we have centralized the office of the officer in charge responsibilities under the IC structure today. Let me pause. If you go to the next slide, Mike, I think that kind of covers the 4 areas. So let me pause and see take questions, because there seem to be some questions in the chat. Do you want me to go
Rich
through the
White, would
question?
you mind reading the questions? I can't get off of the screen otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the questions in the chat look to be from the, I'm sorry, hold on. I have, I think that was from the previous talk. Let me see, that was at 3:06. So yeah, okay, let me ask the question from Will Abrams. How is a corrective action plan integrated with PG&E quality assurance team and associated QC work? Given that all these work streams fall under the chief risk officer, how do you ensure the healthy independence of the QA and corrective action functions to ensure integrity of the findings and recommendations? Will Envista continue to provide regular independent assessments to complement the PG&E QA and CAP work?
So the QA work doesn't fall under the chief risk officer or the chief safety officer. The quality assurance function generally falls under operations. So if there's a work that, let's take vegetation management, if vegetation management is performing the work, under that performance, there's a QA function that'll reside, that'll periodically sample, check the work to ensure that if the work there's a gap, that work can then get remediated and it flows back into the process. So the QA function doesn't fall under the chief risk officer. However, anybody, including the VMI who's doing the work or the QA person doing the work, if they notice something that they feel needs to be rectified, they have the ability to put it into a corrective action, a CAP. They have the ability, anywhere in the company has the ability to enter a CAP about the issue such that it gets reviewed by the appropriate person in the company at that level, and we can trend that specifically. So there's no challenge of independence in that regard to address Mr. Abrams's comment.
And just a quick comment on Will Abrams' comment of will Envista continue to provide regular independent assessments? Is right now the contract for Envista is ending at the end of this calendar year. Let me throw it back over to PG&E.
Yeah, I think I've covered most of the substantive, comments. So I just open it up for questions from the commissioners or from any parties.
I have to go on mute. Thank you very much. Yes, so let's open it up to questions from the commissioners. I have to look at my screen to see if anybody has their hand up or yes, lots of hands are up now. The first one I saw is Commissioner John Reynolds.
Thank you, Richard. I've got a question about the study of grounding methods, circuits, and transformer configuration due to be completed by the end of 2023. Given the timeline of that study, how do you imagine that can be infused with PG&E's overall planning processes, given some of the strategy changes you outlined, like moving to undergrounding in high fire zone districts?
Yeah, Commissioner Reynolds, I'll see if James wants to provide a perspective. James Tuchillo. but from our perspective, we do these studies, and right, this will be another study, like we did the lightning study. And the lightning study, what it did was it told us, hey, given your current system, given the propensity of dry lightning that we're seeing happen more frequently, we would suggest that you put surge arresters in these situations. So from that, we'll take that and we'll put it through our asset management to make sure it flows in the regular plans, and then we ask for it in the cycle of the GRC appropriately. But it takes a fair amount of time for any input coming in from a study to make its way into the standards that we then incorporate and we change, and then in the process of how that gets rolled out for replacement work across. Now, if there are specific instances, and I'll give the instance of we knew last year, right? Here's what happened last year in 2021. We had the Dixie fire. We also noticed that happened on a non-red flag warning day, and there were other significantly high fires. And we asked ourselves the question, what happened in that fire that got so big that we couldn't catch it in time? What could we change across our system that we can without redoing within the capabilities we have? And that's what caused us to adjust the settings on our lines. And the first time we did it, yes, we got a larger number of reliability challenges. But since last year to this year, now we've narrowed it down some more. So whatever we can change within the existing configuration, we will change as quickly as possible. But it goes through the process of, we have to put it in our standards. We write a process so that it's sustainable over the longer period. So the study, when it comes out, we'll examine that and say, okay, given the configuration we have, how extensive is this configuration? It probably won't apply to the undergrounding portions, but on the portion that we're leaving overhead, right? Are there some cases where it may make sense to put, given what we find out from 4-wire, may make sense to convert those to a 4-wire system. Or it may make more sense to leave those as overhead hardened in 3-wire configuration, because the new overhead hardened might have a better risk reduction value proposition. I hope that answered your question as thoroughly as I could.
Yes, it's helpful. Thank you.
And then I see Commissioner Rechtschaffen has his hand up. And I also see Commissioner Shroma has her hand up. Commissioner Rechtschaffen, I saw you.
I think Commissioner Shroma was ahead of me.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize, Commissioner Shroma.
Thank you. My question is, for PG&E in your enterprise risk management, and where it sounds like you really worked to break down silos. Right? I guess what I'm wondering is, for example, your description of the Dixie fire. Is that an example of what Envista identified in terms of the SAIDI?
Yes.
That where because of these, you take out these extreme events, what have you, you get up with this average, but then you've lost touch with those extreme events. And,
yeah, I can see exactly where your question, and it's right on the money. As the way I'm thinking, the way we're thinking about it at PG&E is, there are all these indicators coming, right? You could choose to take out, let's take out, what they call major event days. Let's take out major event. But how about we look at it both with major event days in and major event days out to see if the trends are now seeing an uptick? Because if the trends are seeing an uptick, the question is, what exactly is driving that uptick? And is there something about our current system design, or is there current system that has changed in the environment around us that would require us to operate things differently? The framing that we're doing now is, we have to get a lot better of what I call situational awareness. And situational awareness is not just our weather stations and stuff, because you get these extreme weather events, but also situational awareness about all of the metrics that are deep in our various programs that we see today. And when you see an uptick of trend, that situational awareness should trigger you to ask the question, from an operating practice, what should I do different so that this risk does not materialize? And are there thresholds on those metrics that we could build to then indicate right away that we have a playbook for that operational mitigation? And then if that trend continues, then we go to the point of saying is, listen, this operational mitigation was okay for a time being, but this trend is continuing to get worse. I need to redesign the grid or redesign the system. So in the past, we'd say, hey, we'd monitor the trends, but we go jump directly into, hey, we need to install something or do something different. Our take on it is, if we see the trends, then go to the operational mitigation and finally go to the mitigation if the trend continues. But your point is to keep an open-eyed view of all of the trends, not just the weather trends, but also the internal trends that are happening on our metrics across the board. I hope I answered your question as directly as I could.
You did, thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think Commissioner Rechtschaffen and then President Reynolds.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about the joint covered conductor study you're doing with the other utilities?
Yeah,
And
so
I have the specific thing that comes to mind is, I know, for example, Edison is much more much more robust, or what's the right word? They're more inclined to use that as a mitigation strategy than undergrounding, for example. And you said, what I heard you say is some of the analysis you've done as part of that, or other other reviews of mitigation, is one of the reasons that you're leaning toward undergrounding more of your service territory. But anyway, if you could talk a little bit more about the work you're doing, especially with the joint work and some of the conclusions.
Yeah, so the joint covered conductor study that's being done with Edison, San Diego, and PG&E, right, is really focused because we all have overhead conductor hardened standards. We have standards in place, right, that we currently are standards organization, and we're out there doing that work. But the intention of that study was to understand what are your standards. How will that overhead covered conductor stand up to the weather conditions that we would expect to see? And so it's a lot about actually the environmental testing of the covered conductor itself in terms of, hey, how would it stand up to humidity? What would it stand up to, temperature variations? All of that covered conductor, as we articulated, we use it in California. In our service territory, there was no real study done. The second piece of that is, if that covered conductor gets brought down, because if a tree falls on covered conductor, it's not going to matter, because a tree, given the weight of the tree, the covered conductor is basically would come down like a thread. It's not going to provide you the protection there. But when it lands on the ground, how does it actually operate? How do we test that and see what the situation is in terms of the protection schema, like the high impedance fault? What would happen in a sense? Understand that piece. So we haven't got the full results of that understanding, but that's what's in play for us on the joint covered conductor study. To your second point about a different approach between Edison and PG&E with regards to undergrounding, what we have seen, right, as we go out to some of the locations where the propensity of vegetation and the fact that you will continue to get high extreme events, our belief from a longer term mitigation is the best way to do that would be to eliminate that, to take that wire out of harm's way fundamentally. Now, ideally, you would do it if you could with a remote grid or some sort of this thing so that you don't have to put in undergrounding. But if you can't do that, then the next best option in some of those situations is undergrounding. And then you'd go down to covered conductor as a third option. In Edison service territory, if you look at Edison service territory, and I prefer actually not to comment on other utilities, but since you asked me this question, the northern part of Edison service territory is Kern County, as you look at it. And if you look at where they do their PSPS events, that's the region of their service territory that sees these Diablo type winds. But the vegetation over there is not as it's not the same type of vegetation as you see in Northern California, in the counties up in Lassen or Butte. And so given that mixed difference, cover conductor could work very well for them. And so the location is very specific as to where you would use undergrounding versus covered. And so that's why the flexibility needs to be given for the local determination of where that circuit is located.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So President Reynolds?
Thank you. I just have two questions. One is on the background you gave us on the three-wire system and how it is present in California and that's distinctive from other states. Could you share a little bit of the history there as to why that's the case and why we're different than other states?
Let me ask James Chichillo if he's got that background. I don't know that on the top of my head, President Reynolds. I can dig that up and get that to you. But James, do you happen to know?
Hello. Yeah, I think we'll have to get back on that one. I want to make sure that we would report the history as accurately as possible.
That's fine, thank you. So we'll look for that follow-up. My second question is on the description that you gave of changing the focus, and I think it was the inspections that you were doing that created the large volume of tags and moving from a reliability focus to a wildfire prevention focus. I was wondering if you could describe some examples that what that looks like and how we can think about that in terms of any sacrifice to reliability that you're seeing in changing that focus. So what does that mean? Are you emphasizing wildfire preventions at the expense of reliability? And is that a trade-off, or is it just a better way of evaluating where system improvements need to be made?
Yeah, President Reynolds, no, on the inspection side of the equation, right? By inspecting it for ignition components, inspecting it such that you ask whether that component will fail to cause an ignition, it's a much more rigorous inspection process. So it would catch all the reliability things and more. And so the way it was designed was we looked at basically all of the components that exist on, let's say, a distribution pole. And we said, take every component and ask the question, how would this component fail? Develop a failure modes and effects analysis, and then ask the question, are we looking to see if that failure mode exists to the extent that you can see it with the naked eye on an inspection? Where we have so that's from a reliability versus ignition perspective, it's not really a trade-off. You're going to basically find more defects that would not have failed from a reliability perspective, but that are a higher risk from an ignition perspective. And so we want to address those defects specifically. So,
Okay, so it's a lower threshold for triggering a repair tag.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, understood. Thank you.
It's actually a higher threshold for triggering a repair tag.
Okay, I was saying it in terms of
reliability, yes, lower.
So less in order to get the tag, but yeah, okay. I think we're saying the same thing. Thank you.
All right, great. I want to get to a couple of questions from the chat if we can.
Sure.
We're running a little bit over, but I think we can manage. So I have a question from Nat Skinner. How are you tracking the individual QC associated with the midstream VM inspections, since it seems to be an incidental function of the disparate VM programs? What lessons are learned, and how is it informing the quality of work performed by the VM contractors?
I'm not trying to dodge the question, so let me just state that up front. As I look at the VEG programs at PG&E today, right, they have gotten layer upon layer, whether it's routine, then it was mid-cycle, we also do pole clearing, then we did EVM, and then associated with all of those programs, you then have a QA, QC type function checking to see if the work was done well. Unfortunately, I don't think that's doing us justice. And so the way we've migrated and where we're migrating towards is to say, as we do this program, do we understand the effectiveness of this program? And then where the effectiveness is not as strong, how do we make adjustments to it? So that's where the QA and the QV would come in. To the point is, individual contractors, whether the quality is high or low, that gets tackled directly as the quality verification work happens. If they find a contractor has not done very good quality verification work, the contract organization takes that action back to that contractor and addresses it on an incident by incident basis or grouping of instance basis. But I think what Envista was giving us feedback, which is very much to the point, is we've gotten too many veg programs, and so strategically it makes sense to get it down to one program. If you're going to use QA or QV, use it very thoughtfully. And so QA, as an example, the recommendation was you QA all of the work performed. But what's the most effective way to QA it? You do a VM inspection. You basically patrol the line, and the person would mark what tree needs to be done, what type of radial clearance needs to get worked. Then they have 6 months to work it. And by the way, at the end of the 6 months, the mid-cycle patrol is coming in on those same lines in high fire threat districts and inspecting if there's additional veg work that needs to be done. As they inspect additional veg work, if they spot a tree that was marked in the prior patrol that was not completed, by putting it in one database or one VM database, it ensures wait, this tree was caught, this tree was marked, this tree is still not worked. You do the QA QC real time as part of that, and then you can flag, hey, was it marked by the VM inspector twice in the 1 year period? Why? What's driving that? Was the work not performed? That's how I think it basically best uses that function. But your question you were asking is, how do we take the feedback when there's one contractor or there's some quality findings that have happened? That goes to the normal contracting process. But I'm trying to be very careful we don't introduce more programs. I really want to thin out the veg. Sorry, that was a bad pun. Yeah. But I want to basically focus the veg programs on what I call the bread and butter programs, which is if we do routine really, really well, if we make sure we have VMIs that are certified arborists, all of a sudden we take the quality of our program significantly higher. And also get away from the lump sum contracts, go to the time and material contracts for tree removal. Veg management, try to internalize that as much as possible rather than have contractors do that work. Those are the strategies we're pursuing at this point in time. Sorry, I'm not sure who asked the question. I hope I answered it to the best of my ability, but I didn't want to answer a side question and leave the bigger picture out.
Great. So thank you. There's one more question I think we should get to, which is from Max Henryon. It's to what extent is PG&E using risk spend efficiency as a guide to selecting enhanced vegetation management, 4 wires, cover conductor, undergrounding, and other mitigation options?
So there's an entire proceeding around how should we use RSCs or how should we use the cost benefit. And I don't want to get into that because that process just got settled. We got to incorporate that into the whole investment planning decision process to assess various mitigations. But how do we use RSCs? You're looking at every mitigation. You're asking the questions: is this mitigation getting me the best, the most amount of risk removed for the dollar spent? That's basically the concept of RSC. I would argue there's a missing element in that, and the missing element is time. As we speak today, we're very fortunate right now that it's rained recently in California. This year we had less wind, so we didn't see as many fires across California, but next year may be different. The best type of RSC in my mind is if we improve the situational awareness. So what do I mean by situational awareness? Forgive me for this. Situational awareness would be we put out every single day, we put a fire potential index out there to every location in our service territory. If the fire potential index is above at a 4, an R4 rating, it's a scale of 0 to 5. If it's at a 4, we require every crew, there's a procedure called TD 1464S. We require every crew to have a water buffalo, to have a shovel such that if a fire starts, they can put it out on the work they're doing. It also signals to everyone in there that we're in elevated fire conditions. We use that same metric on EPSS, which is if the circuit is in an R3 plus condition, our take on it is enable EPSS. Now that we've got recent rain and it's down, disable EPSS. Don't use EPSS. You don't want to pay the reliability price. There's no risk. So that is the most efficient use of the tools that you have at your disposal. And it happens to be a lot more cost effective to do it that way, which plays to the intent of RSCs, risk spend efficiency.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question from Commissioner Shiroma.
Thank you for the dispensation here. Hey, Andrew, in terms of situational awareness, is PG&E, look, in your undergrounding program, where no doubt you have a geographical assessment as to where you want to underground, got a general rate case. You have to have a general rate case in order to fund such. There's a timeline for all those geographical areas where you want to underground. And in the meantime, overlaid on that is, well, what's the condition of the vegetation management? And so, I mean, there's definitely situational awareness, but what about plain old planning? Planning where, I mean, if something is going to take 5 years to underground, I mean, you're not short shrifting the vegetation management in the interim.
No, so Commissioner Shiroma, the undergrounding program looks across the entire system, right? And says, based on our wildfire distribution response model version 3, what are the highest risk locations? Then what we did was we said is on those highest risk locations, right? From a feasibility perspective, if it's granite, if it's on a super steep slope, if it's crossing water crossings, those are areas we know that would take a lot of time, both from a permitting as well as from an execution standpoint, to undergrounding. So you overlay that. And that planning effort already starts, it goes. While that's taking place, obviously the wires are still overhead. Since the wires are still overhead, we're doing routine vegetation, we're doing the mid-cycle patrol, and you're addressing the P1 or P2 trees and the radial clearances while that's happening. At the same time, since those wires are overhead, you've got those circuits, the existing equipment, you've got basically the controllers over there have EPSS capability now on them. So should the condition rise up, you turn EPSS on. When the condition drops, you turn it off. If the condition rises up such that that wind is extremely high, we exercise PSPS. So the protection for our communities is provided while the planning work for the undergrounding for that location moves on as quickly as we feasibly can do it. So it's not that we stop the undergrounding or we stop the veg. The undergrounding work is getting planned out to get accomplished. The vegetation work is accomplished while the lines remain overhead. And then your protection on your operational mitigations are protecting you today. Once it's undergrounded, then you don't need the operational mitigation or the veg work.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, thanks. I see there's another question from Will Abrams. I'm going to ask you to hold off on that question until after the next talk and ask you to restate your question after that. I think that might save us a little bit of time. So thank you, Andrew. We appreciate your presentation. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move on to the next presentation from the PUC staff regarding some thoughts on corrective actions. So I'm going to share my screen now. Share. So as I mentioned, I'm Richard White, analyst in the Safety Policy Division. I've been the manager for the root cause analysis project from its beginning about 1.5 years ago. And I'm going to discuss some of our thoughts about what might be some corrective actions that might make sense given the comments from Envista and the comments from PG&E. We've had some really interesting discussions so far. I'm just going to review some of the things we've already seen. These 4 categories that Envista talked about and that PG&E also talked about: institutions, circuits, vegetation, and emergency conditions. Oops, sorry about that. So a couple of the key points that we pulled out of the Envista report is that PG&E failed to identify and mitigate the increasing risk profile. And that's sort of the key point: fail to identify and mitigate. And I think that goes to some of the issues that we just heard about from PG&E about really understanding problems, the CAPA programs, and so on. The fact that these issues were present, but were not identified. And again, the circuitry problem with the 3-wire, 4-wire issue, is the 3-wire system a reasonable system at this point? Certainly, it is a California phenomenon that we have this 3-wire system. And so the question going forward is how do we deal with what we have right now? And that with vegetation management, a lot of talk about vegetation management so far, the audit process and so on. And also, I know there was a number of discussions from Envista about some input to general orders. And again, the PSPS programs, another way to mitigate wildfire risk by making a trade-off with reliability, essentially. You're now cutting people off from service. And so these are generally the issues that I think, we all kind of understand at this point. And so what we've done and our perspective from the staff view is that a number of these issues really, we think about these problems from a visibility standpoint. How can we actually understand what PG&E is doing? PG&E is making great progress in many of these programs, in the risk analysis, in their vegetation management program, implementing a number of the CAPA programs. But we think it's very important to not only have that, have understanding that these programs are occurring, but that have visibility into those programs. So one example is to think about a general disagreement that currently exists between PG&E and I think other engineers outside of California about the quality of the 3-wire systems. Certainly, 3-wire systems have been upgraded, and PG&E is managing it in many, many ways. But the key uncertainty is the state of those systems. And as we just heard, sort of the situational analysis, what's really happening right now at particular circuits in particular places. And so a better understanding of what's happening in those places, in those locations, and given the vintage and given the vulnerabilities of any particular system at any particular time is something that could be very useful. Likewise, operational issues, they're pervasive throughout the report. Vegetation management programs, the maintenance, we've talked about CAPA a lot, and records management associated with sort of the CAPA program. It's like, how do we know that information that is collected is actually being transferred and moved along the chain? And we know that PG&E is doing some great work with improving their programs, but again, sort of the check the box approach of, is there a program? Is that really enough? Or do we need something else to really understand a little bit more about the quality of those programs and whether those programs are actually appropriate? And so the way we're thinking about bringing these together is through these risk-based decisions, risk assessment process, as Max alluded to, sort of the risk spend efficiency. So given the state of some assets and given the state of the operations, what are the best things to do? And that really depends on what the state of the assets are and what the state of the operations are. And so we think of the risk assessment really as being much more dynamic, really being focused on the entire portfolio and not necessarily on specific events, but the portfolio of things that are drivers to those events. Typically, PG&E has been using the bow tie approach to kind of do that analysis. We think that's a great analysis, but again, we think that more detail in those analyses would be important to provide a little more visibility into the processes that are going on and also the quality of the processes that are going on. So I also wanted to make a point that was brought up by the Independent Safety Monitor. They identified, and this chart comes from the Independent Safety Monitor, which got it from PG&E. So this is, PG&E essentially document, looking at the differences between the risk ranking that came out of different models. And so this complicated diagram is basically showing that the rankings are changing as the models are changing. And so it's not clear whether the data is changing behind the model is changing behind them, whether the models are changing. A number of things are changing, but what is it? And why are these rankings changing? So that creates a whole nother level of uncertainty. How do we trust the models? I see that Andrew has raised a hand, so I'm going to hold on for a second and just go ahead and ask you to go ahead and ask your question, Andrew.
My question, right? I think this is an excellent chart, and I'm really happy you put it up there, right? What this is, if you look on the left, it says V2. Right? That's the wildfire distribution risk model version 2. And then on the way on the right, it says wildfire distribution risk model. It says version 3. What it is it's inherent when you make a change and you improve a risk model, that the ranking of where the risk exists will move around because you're incorporating another year's worth of data. You're incorporating much more, another set of information into it. And so you should see rankings change as you improve risk models over time. So all where we're saying is like, hey, where did some of it go and why did it go in this way? This one between version 2 and version 3, the biggest reason there was a big shift over here was because you introduced the new information that you found out about consequence, which was how do fires spread from the center portion of the circle, meaning from the grass levels all the way up to the top of the trees. The ladder fueling effect really changed the profile of where the risk sits. And we've seen, because once the wildfire is at the tips of the trees on the top, even CAL FIRE backs off. Stopping it becomes really challenging. So you want to find locations where that could happen. And in version 2, we didn't have that. In version 3, we have it. So that's why the big change there.
Yeah, and thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate that. And that is really goes to one of the really important points of having a deeper understanding of how models change. Again, there's, as you mentioned, it sounds like sort of the understanding of the model particular change. I also wonder about the quality of the data. So when I think about not only these particular models, but CAPA data. So for instance, if there is, up-to-date information about trends that are going on, how is that going to impact these changes in potential rankings? So a number of things can change. Trends can change. The models can change. Different technologies can be deployed at different times in different time frames. All those things can change. All those things changing at the same time makes it very difficult to understand really what you're looking at. And so our view is that it makes a lot of sense to have a little more in-depth, robust analysis into how the models are operating, but also the sensitivity of the models. So when certain things change, how much is that going to change your rankings? Is that going to change if the data changes a little bit, if the trends change a little bit, if the technology changes, how does that affect your rankings? That's really critical to understanding the quality of the models, the quality of the data, and really the ability to make rational decisions. Is the information, the model, and the technology that's being applied consistent? And so that's really what we're trying to get to, is that high quality, what I call robust risk assessment and risk decision modeling. Does that make sense?
If you ask me, yes.
Yeah. So let me move on to the next slide, and then we'll go to sort of our specific recommendations. So again, our high level objectives are really to, one, focus on the three-wire versus four-wire configuration of the distribution system, and also look at alternatives. I think there are these REFCL systems. You've developed covered conductor, all sorts of alternatives to really investigate what the state of that system is, what those parameters are, what's the situational analysis is for particular circuits throughout PG&E's system. And so we think that an expansion of the existing SEI 20 project significantly would be a really important thing to look at. We also think that, as I was just discussing, independently verifying and validating the performance of the risk models will be very important, to think about the entire portfolio, so that we're looking at, not only the assets and the particular events, but looking at the sensitivities. We're looking at the impact of vegetation management programs as a mitigation factor. We're looking at weather conditions, all the things within the portfolio that really kind of impact whether or not one mitigation or another makes a difference. And then thirdly, as a supporting activity, is really data quality and the records management. So all of these activities require good information. They require that inspections are tracked consistently, accurately, and that they're shared with the right people. We also think there should be transparency, so that this information can be clearly understood by stakeholders. Things like, where have vegetation activities actually taken place, and so on. So these are sort of our three high-level corrective actions. Is enhancement of three-wire program, independently verify and validate performance, and improvement of the risk modeling, and improve data collection. And just a little more detail on these. So again, expand the SEI 20 program. So it's sufficient to assess the expected circuit level performance and ignition risk. And one of the things that we've discussed with some of our folks internally and some outside experts about this is really, how do we do the appropriate test, develop the appropriate test criteria? Do we need to build simulation models of the systems? Do we need to perform lab tests, field tests, or lab tests to understand, the actual performance of the system? Again, this is an open question, but these are some of the things that people have discussed so far. And so we do believe that a really detailed assessment of the three-wire system is appropriate. And so we are asking to significantly expand the funds for SEI 20. The second proposal is really getting to these robust risk models of asset and operational portfolio. And a big piece of that is that we think that should include an independent model validation process. So as we talked about, this robust model can include really starting getting to some of the things that Max Henrion talked about including uncertainty and using probability distributions as opposed to expected values for estimating performance. Looking at correlation of key events. I think you mentioned there are correlation between wind events in particular circuits. So correlation of activities we think are very important to understand. So we think this should be included in more robust risk models. And as I mentioned before, sensitivity analysis is one of the key things for regulators to understand and verify the validity of the models. Where are they good? Where are they not good? And then I think, as President Reynolds alluded to, understanding the trade-offs. When there are trade-offs between certain things such as cost, wildfire risk, and reliability, regional and local impacts, how can we really assess what those trade-offs are in a quantitative way? And so that's one of the things we think is very important to have, to assess those trade-offs between really core values. And again, as I mentioned before, the independent assessment. This is just, we think, is a very important component to provide kind of confidence to stakeholders and the commission about the quality of the models, whether the models are how biased they may or may not be. All models are biased in some way, but understand what those biases are. And then also to understand the value of certain information that might be required to improve those models. So there's a number of things that are really important about doing that independent assessment. So that's our second proposal, is essentially the robust risk model improvement and independent model validation. And then the third piece, which underlies kind of both of the previous project, is really kind of an independent review of PG&E records management process. Things like the CAPA program you know, have been highlighted in this report and have been discussed today. But we think it would be very important to kind of have a review of those programs and those processes. OEIS has also discussed doing an independent review of records management. So those are the key components that we're thinking about as corrective actions, the three programs. That is essentially so those are the three programs. And I'll just quickly summarize: the SEI 20 funding, robust risk models and operational portfolio, and the independent review of records management. So I see you have your hand up already.
Yeah, Richard, I put my hand. Let Commissioner Wright-Staffen go ahead first.
Yeah. So yeah, I had to stop sharing. I have to stop sharing my screen so I can see.
You go ahead, Andrew. You go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I think you know, if I respond to the three pieces, a couple of things that I would raise. One is the independent study makes a lot of sense. Let's do the independent study, but we've got to ask ourselves the question: if we do the independent study, and it tells us the 4-wire system is what we need to go to, then we've got to accept that as we need to do that, then the shift that will happen will be over time in moving to the 4-wire system. So I'm not opposed to investigating the 4-wire system. Let's investigate that. Let's understand that. Given where President Reynolds is questioned, what was the history of why it was created in the first place? Let's understand that first on how it came about. And then what would be the journey to make the change into something else, should it make sense? On the second recommendation, which is about the risk models, I apologize, but I feel that it was left hanging that the current risk models are not probabilistic, and that is absolutely not true. All three utilities today use very advanced machine learning models to develop their risk models. and those are in play. An independent review of those is absolutely right on board. Happy to do that. Happy to give those models out, give as much detail to that. But they are very complex machine learning models for someone to understand. So that's where I would recommend is the independent review, no problem. Independent evaluation. Internally, all the utilities give those models out to others to look at so that they can, kick the tires and give us recommendations back. We use E3 at PG&E. But it would be useful if the commission selected an independent reviewer and said all the utilities, give them their risk model, they assess it on set criteria. Happy to do that. What I'm seeing in the wildfire mitigation plan, I hate to put it this way, but it's a bit of an overreach. They're asking, how do you model 20 year, 60 year, 300 year? What would I do with that if I modeled it? Would I make a change to my system and provide protection tomorrow? I don't believe so. The third one that was brought up, which was with regard to the CAP program, happy to let anyone see the CAP program, analyze it. But if you want to improve the records information, every utility maintains asset registries. This is what exists about their components, about their structures at a location. What is the vintage? What is the make? What is that? The asset registries is what you want to look at. So I would provide the guidance is put a program to improve the asset registries within the utilities. That would be welcomed. We're already doing some work, but added pressure in that regard would provide a better value to California.
Great, thank you. And I'll just have a quick response to a couple of your points. One is the history. I think that's really important. That is one of the things that we've thought about is doing essentially a literature review, what exists, what's the history and so on. So that I think that's right on point. And I do welcome your openness to kind of looking at SEI 20 and expanding that and having a real review on that. I appreciate that. The second point on the risk models, yeah, we do completely understand that the models within the utilities are very advanced. There's a number of things that the utilities are doing which are right on point. The things that we're interested in is visibility to those models within the commission so that the commission has the ability to exercise those models and really do sensitivity analysis and understand what are the trade-offs that are involved in there and the value associated with any of the parameters that and assumptions that may have gone into that. So this is a little bit of a handoff in a sense to not, handoff is not quite the right word, but allow the commission the ability to really exercise the models in some way rather than just sit on the analyst desk in the utilities, but have the commission the ability to exercise the models in a meaningful way. So that's part of the independent validation. So that's really where that's headed towards. And then again, so the last piece of the records management piece, I think that's open for discussion. I appreciate again your comments about the asset registry and so on. So I think there's commonality there, and I think that's really a good point for discussions. So apologies. I have to play moderator and answering the questions at the same time, so it's a little. So I see Commissioner Shiroma has a question.
More of a comment, but I think Commissioner Rexhoffen had his hand up first.
Okay, Commissioner Rexhoffen, I'm sorry, I apologize.
It's okay. Richard, if you're answering the questions and calling on people, it's great. You can call on yourself most of the time.
Yeah.
makes things easier.
Right.
I had a question or a couple of questions, but the interchange you had with Andrew both helped me and set me back a little bit on the answer. So, but let me ask a simpler question, and then I'll ask a more complicated question. Andrew, you said if you're fine with doing this, expanding the analysis of three-wire versus three-wire versus four-wire, it'll take time. What is the order of expenditure we're talking about to convert the system? I mean, is it? I have no sense of the order of magnitude.
No, so to give you an order of magnitude, when we say like, hey, we're trying to underground this, when you're undergrounding a mile of circuit, right? that price can range. We're trying to bring that price down. That price is about what, $3 to $4 million is what we're trying to target, right? Basically, so that's what it is. If it's a 3-wire system today and you want to convert it to overhead hardened infrastructure, I think the numbers we put in our rate case, and this is subject to check, so forgive me for this, but is in the range of about $2 million. So now when you're going to convert, let's take 25,000 miles. Let me just divide that up and say, okay, 10,000 miles, we've said, hey, we think it makes sense to underground. Now we may hash around that number, which means there's still 15,000 miles over there. And just let's assume if on those 15,000 miles, you want to say those are all 3-wire, convert those to 4-wire. Got it? We'd have to figure out how much does it cost per mile to convert it. Overhead system hardening today is about $2 million per mile. So then the question becomes, would 4-wire be approximately that price? If you're putting overhead wire in high fire threat districts, you would put covered conductor. So I would assume $2 million per mile is roughly the, and I'm giving rough numbers here. I apologize. I'm not going my rate case and pulling these out, but just to give you a sense. So then you multiply that by 15,000 miles to give you an order of magnitude.
Well, that's what I asked for. That's helpful. So I understand, Richard, I'm going to ask you about the staff recommendations. I understand the expanding the SEI 20 project is a discrete recommendation, and Andrew, didn't express any concerns with that, just said it may take some time. I'm having a little trouble, and I think as a follow-up, it might be helpful for staff to map out, especially on the second, maybe on the third recommendation, how this fits into everything else that's going on. Because OEIS has, in the wildfire mitigation plans, has certainly required the utilities to do risk-based mitigation and required increasing sophistication in what they're doing, and held their feet to the fire, the bad pun, held their feet to held them accountable for that. We've looked at that in when PG&E was in stage 1 of the enhanced oversight and enforcement process, and we do that to some degree through the ramp in the risk spend efficiency, where those are risk-based models to predict risk. So I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how this maps with everything else, and I'm particularly not sure what it means that staff would exercise the models. I certainly agree with the idea of them being transparent to the public, but I don't know what that means that staff would exercise the models. We're not going to be doing the risk assessment for the utilities. We want to make sure that the risk assessments, the methodology is robust. But I just don't. So that's a ask as a follow-up. And then I forgot even about the independent system monitor, which is also
help a little bit with that, Commissioner Rexhaven, if you like.
Thank you, Ben. I was going to call on you for that one.
Yeah. So on the number 2 item, last year, as part of the SMAP proceeding, you'll recall we had an independent consultant group, level 4, review the wildfire mitigation plan risk models and the ramp risk models for all of the utilities. And they did a kind of a baseline assessment of all the work done to identify, prioritize, and look at the mitigation strategies of the utilities. In that report, at the end, they made some recommendations for further study of those, and they included a variety of ideas for further study, including looking at how the mitigations interact with one another, and rather than piling mitigations on top of each other and averaging it out, like how do they interact and change the risk profile of the utilities, and a number of other specific recommendations. So we were thinking, and then because it ties in with the RCA and the ISM findings about risk modeling and how it's changed over time. We thought it'd be useful to fund an independent review of PG&E's work to look at some of those additional areas of inquiry identified in the level 4 report. Does that help?
somewhat. It's still complicated. I still don't fully understand. I don't fully understand what it would mean that we would we would exercise the model. I mean, I don't know what role that is.
So
anyway, I'll stop and turn.
I'll just give you a quick
turn it over.
I'll give you a quick hint of what I think about that. If you go back to that diagram with the little blurry things going from one risk mitigation to another. There are parameters behind that. A small change in one of those parameters can change the result. And so the question for exercising is what happens if a piece of data is off by 0.5%? Will that change the result? And that's sort of exercising the model, is where is the sensitivity to change? That's kind of the question. And I'll go to Commissioner Sharoma next.
Thank you. Personally, I very much like what what the team is recommending on the risk models. Was it last week? We had a whole workshop on the SoCal gas modeling. The CPUC, the Energy Commission, SoCal Gas, a consultant, an expert consultant. It included stochastic modeling, all geared towards providing assurances on what to expect for the winter and into next year. I think it's very important for we, the regulators, to understand those models. And at various times, we hear about proprietary models. Okay, proprietary. Well, then that becomes a black box. And I have asked before, whether PG&E has tested their models with data. Also looking ahead, I asked about looking ahead to climate change impacts. So I think this is a very important effort here. The mystery needs, we the regulators need to have confidence in those models, whether it's PG&E's or Edison's or Southern California Edison, and there needs to be a nexus for our regulators. I know that there are non-disclosure agreements and so forth and so on. Okay, but our team needs to understand that. And I also think in terms of the data, it was a bit disturbing to hear that they couldn't find records, so forth. And I know, Andrew, you folks are really working on course correcting that. But that's also essential. And then on the 3-wire versus 4-wire, okay, understand what was the background for why California went with 3-wire. But again, in the total effort of the wiring, whether it's undergrounding, covered conductor, vegetation management, the emergency shut-off system, the ability to shut off the system as wires are falling, all of that, all that does also feed into these models. So I just want to say thanks to the thanks to the CPUC.
Yeah,
I'll stop there. Thanks.
I appreciate the comment, and the thing that stuck out to me is when you mentioned the black box, and this goes back to Commissioner Rexhoffen's question about how do we exercise it. There is this process called black box testing, where you have a black box and you test you put in some inputs and you see what the outputs to understand if the model is doing what it's supposed to do. So I think there's a middle ground between getting into the weeds of the model and having enough information about what the model is supposed to do, but also having enough visibility into the performance of that model. And so I think there's definitely a fair amount of work to figure out what's the right balance between the information that is proprietary and the information that's shared with the commission. But I do think it's really important to have much more visibility into the performance of the models, not just in a separate model by model case, but their overall performance vis-a-vis what happens to the risk spend efficiency and how does that actually change. So I'm going to go to Commissioner Houck next. I see your hand up, Andrew, but I'm going to Commissioner Houck next.
Of course.
No, thank you. And I also think there's some, you've done a lot of good work here. There's some good recommendations that have come out of the root cause analysis, staff's recommendations. My question is going to what is happening on the ground right now. I'm particularly concerned about some of the asset management issues, and also those are exasperated by some of the record keeping matters that we've just been discussing, as well as the size of PG&E's territory and the complex geography that you're dealing with. So as we're looking at models and portals and putting the data in place, all of that's important to get things on track and looking at going forward. How is that also being dealt with as far as looking at what's actually happening on the ground with some of these assets that may need to be replaced or improved? And how are you working through that at the same time you're looking at what you're going to be doing to go forward?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Houck, to answer your question, is as the inspection process comes in or as failures happen, right? We do undergo an extent of condition. What's the extent of condition that we've noticed? And based on that extent of condition, take appropriate action to remediate that as quickly as possible. So that's kind of the real near time running the business and doing that appropriately based on what's surfacing on the ground, to answer your question directly.
And just to follow up, are you also, as far as prioritizing inspections with some of the older equipment, how are you managing looking at where to prioritize looking at some of these assets, especially if there's concerns about the record keeping?
Yeah, so the point was brought up around, hey, if you're looking at record keeping, I suggested focus on the asset registry, because the asset registry will tell you what information is there, what information is not there. The asset registry helps feed the risk model, and then the risk model helps feed where would you go and inspect, where it tells you where there's gaps. So the other one is we do correct, right? As we encounter assets or information that's missing, it corrects the asset registry in almost real near time as the information flows in. So that's how the risk models get updated, and then guides your inspection on that process. But hearing where Richard is coming from on the risk models and also what Commissioner Shiroma is bringing up, I think it would be because the complexity of these risk models, it takes an expertise to understand that. And if we want to give it to a third party, completely support that, let's choose one of our research institutions that exist in California. The UCLA Research Institute, right, has one of the best risk assessment. It has the best, globally recognized as the best experts for risk. It's a department, it's in UCLA. If we want to fund them to focus and tell the utilities, give your risk models to UCLA here, there's non-disclosure, give it out, and then they can help the commission tremendously. The chair of the department is Dr. Ali Mosley. We go to him for advice. We hire from his students because they have that depth of expertise. So if we want to understand the risk models and drive uniformity across California, let's go to a place like that. Because I'm seeing other entities come into this space, and I'm going, what's the basis of their expertise? And I don't mean it disrespectfully. On the wildfire mitigation plan, there was Jensen Hughes. What I'm doing right now, I'm going through to try and write the wildfire mitigation plan, and I'm looking at sections in a doctoral thesis from one person. And then I've interacted with Dr. Sam Savage. Yeah. Great professor. I understand his book. Let's give it to an institute like UCLA.
Yeah. So I appreciate the comments. I'm going to start to wrap up the conversation. I think we've gotten all the questions from commissioners. I'm going to go to there's a couple of questions from the chat I want to get to real quickly from Chris Parks. He has 3 questions. How will the Safety Policy Division implement the Envista General Order recommendations? 2, will Envista follow through to independently assess implementation of its recommendations? And 3, is the predominance of 3-wire system in California related to all in that California has not adopted the National Safety Code?
Hey, for Rich, might be just useful just to talk about, like, for questions number 1 and 2, it would be you can just talk about the next steps to wrap it, wrap this up. And then for the third one, I don't actually track what that one's asking about.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the third question, but I will go to the next steps, which is the next steps for this process is really to take comments from parties, stakeholders, to have their thoughts and concerns about what's been presented today. We will look at there is a email address called Wildfire RCA at cpuc.ca.gov where comments can be sent to, and I'll send the link out to that. That will be included in the presentation documentation. So you can send all your comments to that email address. Once we receive those comments, we're going to be developing a staff proposal. And this proposal will include kind of a understanding of those comments and thoughts. We are also considering doing a second workshop. During that workshop, we would discuss the details of those proposals. You know, we definitely got into some meat on questions of how these kind of proposals would work in action. So we'll get into a little more detail about that in a second workshop. And then once we have that second workshop, we'll have a final staff proposal, which will go out for comment for the 20-day comment period. And we anticipate that there would be a resolution that would be presented to the commission for a vote at that point. So that's essentially the next steps that we're anticipating at this point. Are there any other questions or comments? And we do have all the questions that have been included in the chat will be saved, and so those will be, you know, part of the comments that we'll be looking at.
I just pasted that email address into the chat, the wildfire RCA at cpuc.ca.gov.
Great.
And we'll be sending a note to everyone who's invited about the soliciting comments shortly.
Yes. So with that, what I'll do, I think we're at the end of this meeting, and I'd like to ask the commissioners if they have any final comments or questions. So I'll do the round robin to see who. I have to go through my list of folks, and so I will start with President Reynolds. Are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, I don't have any further questions or comments. Just wanted to reflect that this was a good discussion. I really look forward to the follow-up.
Great. Thank you very much. And let's see, Commissioner Rechtschaffen.
Well, I would say I didn't hear a lot of negative. I didn't hear a lot of no from PG&E about much of anything. So I think that's pretty good. I don't know. I mean, some of the proof remains in the pudding. I don't have a sense of the scale of these expenditures on, you know, on these different prophylactic measures or research efforts going forward. So that may be a good follow-up to give us some sense of the various recommendations, how much would be spent on various items. I do think that the overall trend line is positive, both in this and in the other proceedings that we discussed and that I talked about, and that's important. I mean, it's important that PG&E has really made a lot of changes and is committed to doing more over the past 4 or 5 years. So I think that's all quite positive. Thank you, and thank you for all the work, and thanks to Envista for its thorough investigation of the root causes here. I think this does. I should say this. We shouldn't have to order, and hopefully we won't have to order root cause analysis going forward. I hope. I couldn't quite tell if there was some discussion back and forth about the corrective action plan on PG&E's part, but these the best practice for safety management and certainly for safety culture proceedings is that these are done automatically with anything significant. So I hope and assume that is the norm at PG&E and the other utilities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Shiroma?
Just adding my thanks to you, Richard, and the Safety Policy Division team, to the Envista team, to PG&E. Very, very good presentations, good conversation. I've gained some insights, and I look forward to the unfolding of the rest of the proceeding. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Hauk?
No, thank you. I really appreciate the presentations today, the information provided, and also look forward to continued discussions as we move forward with assessing the root cause analysis. So thank you to everyone today.
Thank you. Commissioner Reynolds?
Thank you, Richard. I will echo the thanks of all of my colleagues. I thought that today's discussion was really thoughtful, and I appreciated it. I learned a lot, and I think I'd offer my kudos to the work of SPD, to Envista, and really appreciated the discussion here today with PG&E as well. I look forward to continued development in this proceeding.
Great, thank you.
And can I add one more point?
Sure.
Sorry, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I just wanted to add one more reflection. We talked a lot about the tools that PG&E is using, and specifically PSPS and EPSS. And I wanted to make sure that that I'm communicating that the consideration of impacts on reliability in using those tools is critically important. And I did hear, Andrew, a recognition that the original PSPS in 2019 was very broad. And I know that a lot of changes had been made, but I did not want to end this workshop without noting that the concerns about EPSS in particular remain, and there's a lot of work to be done there.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Richard, for letting me add that.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to thank all of the commissioners today for spending an extended period of time in this workshop, going into the beginnings of gory details on some of the issues of this root cause analysis. And I'd also like to thank Envista Forensic for all of their work, Matt Steiner, Charlie Fisher, Matt Olechek, and Mark Drexel, I'll go with Mark. Mark knows what I'm saying. But I'd like to thank those folks for all the work that they've done. And I'd also like to thank PG&E and Andrew. This is my first time meeting you. Thanks meeting you. And also Spencer, I'm sure is on the line there somewhere, and Mike as well. So I appreciate the time everyone has spent preparing for this meeting and the thoughtful comments and so on. So we look forward to hearing from you. Wildfire RCA at cpuc.ca.gov. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with our next steps as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.